The miners were tapping and pounding in the dark crystal mine. The orders of the Mage Council are transmitted back and forth between the kingdoms. The emerging steam weapons are becoming popular at an astonishing speed. Even the bold giant-eared goblins have become nervous. In this world he created himself, Hugh Ernst was at a loss. He doesn't know too many details. But he knew that the black sun, symbolizing destruction and a new era, was about to descend. P.S. A lot of fantasy, a little steampunk, Cthulhu, and overhead World War, fog. Hope everyone likes it. Keywords of the novel. Black Sun hanging without pop-ups, Black Sun hanging high TXT complete collection download, Black Sun hanging high latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Hell's Jokes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Hell's Jokes. Lin Shioga looked at his body, feeling a bit confused and sad, while also feeling a bit amused. In less than 3 minutes after his death, his mental journey had already undergone countless twists and turns. He watched his former colleagues gather around his body, constantly trying various first aid methods, but only Lin Shioga knew that no matter how hard they tried, they could not change the sad fact in front of him. I am already dead. My soul has all gone out of my body. Lin Shioga turned his head somewhat melancholy and looked at the wall next to him, where a poster was posted. That is a uniquely styled and well-crafted fantasy poster. A huge black sun hanging high above some dilapidated spire buildings, with a large line of characters written below it. There is still 1 day left until the launch of Black Sun Era. Looking at the familiar poster in front of him, Lin Shioga began to doubt whether he had watched too many hellish jokes, which led to his final death resembling a hellish joke. As the main person in charge of the plot and worldview of the game, Black Sun Era, he died suddenly on the morning of the game project's launch. His death came so quickly that he couldn't even deeply understand the concept of death. He returned to his workstation with melancholy, gazing at everything familiar around him, watching the familiar body of his past being taken to the elevator by medical staff and colleagues who had rushed in. Lin Shioga instinctively wanted to catch up, but a sense of fatigue and drowsiness entangled him, making it impossible for him to stand up from the office chair under him anymore. Is that how it ends? He muttered to himself in helplessness, and then closed his eyes in response to the drowsiness. The sleep on the soul level did not last too long, because in the darkness, there seemed to be a sound coming from afar, from faint to loud, and finally completely shattered Lin Shioga's hard-won sleep. He angrily opened his eyes, wanting to see which bastard had the heart to destroy the sleep quality of a dead ghost. In front of him was still a familiar office scene, and he was still sitting on his most familiar workstation. However, the studio, which was supposed to be incredibly bright, had now become extremely dark and oppressive. Everything around him seemed to be shrouded in heavy darkness, making it impossible to peek. He can't see anyone. So Lin Shioga turned his head to look out the window, and to his surprise, the world outside the window was also pitch black. The darkness was so even, as if someone had covered all the windows with a black curtain. In a moment of confusion, the sound that had awakened him before came again. Lin Shioga hesitated and looked in the direction of the sound, only to see a faint light flickering in the darkness far away. It sounded like a sound from a certain fighting game, and he could even recognize the sound effects of one of the characters releasing skills and combos. What the hell is going on? Lin Shioga squinted his eyes and glanced in the direction of the light, but soon his gaze was drawn to the nearby computer screen. For some unknown reason, there were some strange and unfamiliar words floating on top of the computer screen. They looked like ink floating in the air, floating up and down in front of the screen. When Lin Shioga focused his gaze on them, their corresponding meanings naturally appeared in Lin Shioga's mind. 2 fangs of mountain trolls. At the moment of understanding this line of text, Lin Shioga froze in place. After regaining his senses, he immediately turned his gaze to the side, and saw more floating black letters on the computer screens, office storage cabinets, and even tablets on the desktop. 500 universal gold coins. 3 bottles of moss on the swamp witch's back. Any mage apprentice's eyeball. The left ear of an adult earth dragon. A set of authentic female aristocratic jewelry from the Kingdom of Waterloo. Various strange vocabulary and sentences filled Lin Xiuga's mind. He reached out his hand, wanting to touch these floating words and the things behind them, but his palms seemed to touch a transparent wall and could not achieve his wish. Universal gold coins, dungeons, swamp witches, and the Kingdom of Wattel. These are all terms in our own gaming worldview. Lin Xiuga pondered and carefully arrived at the dark corridor. As an experienced plot planner who had been poisoned by various chaotic cultures, he had some bold speculations and ideas about what was happening before him. However, he did not dare to be certain about it and could only explore towards the only place that emitted light and sound. This corridor is not long, with snack racks and beverage cabinets provided to the project team placed against the wall. There are also several vending machines next to them, but now, these things are also floating with that kind of eerie text, which makes it difficult for Lin Xiuga to explore. At the end of the corridor is the resting corner. That place is also known as the fishing corner. When he is not too busy with work, Lin Xiuga occasionally blows water and fish with his close colleagues there, or plays arcade games that can show off his skills. He can be certain that that's where the light shines. Quickly, Lin Xiuga arrived at the side of the resting corner and first saw the glowing screen. As he had previously judged, the game console was running the latest sequel to the classic fighting game, and across the screen, a slender figure was comfortably leaning against a lazy sofa. Lin Xiuga couldn't see the person's face clearly, and even couldn't distinguish their gender. He could only see that the other person was wearing a fitted black suit, and their face was shrouded in a dark mist. At this moment, they were concentrating on operating the game controller in their hand. K.O. The familiar game sound effects came from the direction of the screen, and huge and eye-catching fonts popped out on the screen. In the light of the screen, Lin Xiuga walked up to ask something, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make any sound. Shoo! The strange stranger raised a finger and made a silent gesture, then reached out and pointed to the nearby wall. Lin Xiuga looked along and found that two huge doors had appeared on the originally empty wall at some point. Both doors are made of metal, and on the left door, a huge ship is depicted. However, around the ship, there are countless hands that seem to be trying to replace and dismantle the parts on the ship. On the right side of the door, it is relatively simple. There is no pattern on top of it, but a line of text floats. The Crown of the Black Sun. As before, this door was separated by an invisible wall that Lin Xiuga could not touch. So he could only come to the left door, but before he could further explore, the tightly closed door suddenly opened on its own. There was nothing behind the door, only a pure darkness. At this moment, an indistinguishable chuckle came from behind. Lin Xiuga was about to turn back to look, but he felt a sudden force acting on himself. He could no longer control his balance and fell into the abyss ahead in panic and fear. In the soft colors woven by the light, the beautiful curve once again reflected on the curtains. The young man stopped and held his breath. He could swear that in the past, he had never prayed to the god of the cold wind, but at this moment, he urgently prayed to the deity without a definite image, hoping that he could come here and cast his gaze at the window like himself, and instead opened the curtain to see the stunning scenery behind it. He took out his wine and took a hard sip into his mouth, causing a hot sensation to flow down his throat, igniting the flames in his eyes. At this moment, the god of cold wind, whom he had called out countless times, seemed to have finally lost control. A gentle breeze blew in and gently rolled open a corner of the curtain. Hugh Ernst was lying on the table in the corner of the beer shop, writing frantically, but the sight from beside him made him stop writing very uncomfortable. "Write it. Keep writing." A somewhat hoarse voice urged the owner of this brewery nearby. He was obviously impatient and reached out to pat Shud's shoulder twice. Seeing that the young man in front of him still had no intention of continuing to write, he changed his mind and said, "Okay, I'll go get you a sour beer, old recipe." Well, as usual, add more syrup and ice cubes. The boss walked away with hurried steps, and the blocked sunlight fell back on Hugh Ernst. Hugh turned his head, and once again he saw the face reflected in the glass. This is a young man with deep eye sockets and fair skin, with black hair. Perhaps due to long-term malnutrition, the young man's face is thin, giving people a feeling of staying up late and seriously lacking sleep. Black hair and white skin are the most famous symbols of the Ernst family in the Kingdom of Waterloo. However, as an optional illegitimate child within the family, Hugh Ernst, who was kicked into this small border town, can only rely on writing something unknown in exchange for royalties. This is Lin Xiuga's current state. Of course, if he were just a destitute young man, staying alone in a small border town to write some vulgar literature, he wouldn't feel any unpleasant things, which even fits his job very well. However, in fact, he is facing a huge problem. After 2 consecutive days of repeated confirmation, Xiuga can be certain that he has indeed come into the worldview of the game, Black Sun era. However, as the main person in charge of the game plot and worldview, he is completely unhappy. Because he is currently in an era that is 100 years before the start of the main plot. And he himself seems to have become a character who repeatedly appears in the background setting. In the plot outline created by Hugh himself, Baron Ernst holds a very important position. He will serve as a clue character, guiding players to complete the initial main storyline. It sounds like this is an extraordinary son of destiny. However, in fact, Baron Ernst is a complete unlucky person. Xiuga remembers very clearly that in the final online version of the setting, the life of this Ernst family illegitimate child was completely disconnected from happiness and stability. Despite being an illegitimate child, he still miraculously inherited the family name, but this did not bring any help to his life. Baron Ernst's life was accompanied by death, disaster, and betrayal. After experiencing pain and torment, this poor illegitimate son finally inevitably grew into a cruel pervert active around the Kingdom of Waterloo, and ultimately died on the spot in a large-scale joint expedition. Baron Ernst's head was even melted into a statue, standing forever in the wilderness. Dong! A glass of sour beer with ice and extra syrup was heavily placed in front of Shug, and the golden liquid was shaken back and forth with ice, successfully interrupting Shug's thoughts. The tavern owner Schubert's lewd old face came over from the side, and as soon as he spoke, it made Shug feel annoyed. You still owe a debt. I know, after submitting the manuscript tomorrow, I will pay off the bill. Okay, there are 2 silver coins in total, I remember both. Schubert is very reassured about this young man. He has been like this for the past year, living a good life for 2 days with royalties. Once the funds are cut off, he will start to borrow money everywhere. Although he is in a mess, the amount he should give is never less than half. Schubert glanced at the paper in front of Shug and saw that there were a few more lines on it. He quickly wanted to come over and take a look. As an old bachelor, he really loved what Shug had written and wished he could get a few new books in one go so that he could carry them back to his room and have a good look. Xiuga was a bit amused by the taste and preferences of these otherworldly people and said, Mr. Schubert, I can't write when others are staring at me. I'll submit the manuscript tomorrow, and you can see it in its entirety by the morning after tomorrow at the latest. There's no need to rush for so long. You have so many fucking problems. The old man stomped his feet hard twice, but the words that kept appearing on the paper were so tempting. So he took 2 steps and turned back, saying, Hey kid, can you finish writing today? Of course. After you finish writing, let me take a look first. I'll be ready in a while. I'll erase your allowance from the bill, and today's cup is also my treat. How about that? A transaction that cannot be counted as a transaction was negotiated like this. Schubert's joyful figure disappeared from the entrance of the kitchen, and the entire brewery fell back into peace. At this moment it was morning, and apart from special people like Shug, hardly anyone would come in to drink at this time. Therefore, in the empty brewery, only the faint sound of Shug's second-hand magic ink pen rubbing against paper could be heard. The sunlight gradually shifted, and as Shug's several papers were filled with words, it was already approaching noon. Other customers gradually began to enter the brewery, and the young bartender with long linen hair and a bright face also appeared in the tavern. She came straight towards Shug. "Oh, are you rushing to draft again today?" The waitress's attitude towards Shug remained gentle as ever. She took Shug's empty glass and brought over a cup of hot tea with mint added, saying, "Uncle told me he can see the latest draft with you. If he bragged everywhere after reading it, it wouldn't be good for you." "Thank you very much for your concern, Miss Sally." Shug nodded politely at the beautiful waitress and said, "In fact, as long as Mr. Schubert doesn't brag to the people at the newspaper, there won't be any trouble." The two were about to continue talking when Schubert's annoying voice came back, and the number of people in the tavern began to increase. Sally had to go and entertain other guests. After seeing off the young waitress, Shug's gaze involuntarily drifted towards the magical calendar and clock on the nearby wall. Although the calendars and clocks in the tavern are very old, the magic and mechanisms that support them are still intact, so the time they give is also very accurate and clear. In the year 2699 of the Cartesian calendar, on the 21st day of the Golden Wine month, there is still a quarter of an hour before noon. In 8 more days, the city of Salem will celebrate its annual Armistice Day. Every year, Salem will use this holiday to celebrate the long-term peace between the Kingdom of Wattel and the Kingdom of Delan. Therefore, in recent times, the people in the city will always have a joyful expression on their faces. However, at the thought of this, Shug's face darkened at a visible speed to the naked eye. In this world, perhaps no one knows better than him what will happen in the city of Saren next. He can be certain that the peculiar and beautiful small town he is in will become a real dead end, and there will be no more living people within the towering city walls, including the owner of the newspaper, all the guests in this tavern, and naturally the lewd Schubert and the young and beautiful waitress Sally. This is not Shug's delusion, but a setting he personally typed on the keyboard. However, now this has become the fate he needs to challenge. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Cheap. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Cheap. In the midday sunshine, the huge clock tower located on the central axis of the city of Saren once again made its own loud sound on time. There are 3 chimes in total. The first offering is to the eternal sun god, thanking him for witnessing the peace of the city of Salon. The second offering is to the gentle goddess of March, thanking him for guarding the stability of the city of Salon. The third one is dedicated to the armistice treaty signed here by the Kingdom of Waterloo and the Kingdom of Tehran 299 years ago. Without it, there would not have been the current city of Salem. This is the city of Salon. A neutral city that has been destined to be associated with war, contradictions, and conflicts since its inception. However, in today's city of Salem, it is difficult to see traces of war. Between the prosperous streets and buildings, sculptures and decorations with peace as the theme are everywhere. Everything is to commemorate the hard-earned peace and the precious friendship between 2 powerful kingdoms. Although these 2 giants have experienced several frictions and conflicts over the past 299 years, fortunately, they were able to reach a consensus in the end. As the ancient proverb goes, if Walter and Delan greet each other, there will be no more storms in the world. The special geographical location and historical status give this small town a unique appearance. The area west of the central axis belongs to the Kingdom of Waterloo. The buildings here are as cold and imposing as knives, with sharp and steep lines and towering spires. The decorations on the streets are mostly gray and black. The urban area east of the central axis belongs to the Kingdom of Tehran, which is filled with a variety of rich colors. Blue, green, and bright red and yellow decorate almost all the houses. From a distance, people may even think they have come to the world. Renowned flower and sea view of the Kingdom of Tehran. Tourists who come to admire this scene will see it as a wonder in the world, while those who have lived here for a long time have long been accustomed to enjoying the customs and cultures of two different countries at the same time. Only those who are seriously suspicious will see the East XC area as the claws of two huge beasts probing each other. Hyoga belongs to the last situation. Now, he instinctively carries the utmost malice towards everything in the city of Seren. On the streets, people can already be seen decorating houses and hanging festival flags. On those colorful flags, without exception, two tightly clasped hands are depicted, which are flags used to celebrate the anniversary of the Salem Armistice Agreement. Armistice Day is a very special holiday. In commemoration of the hard-earned peace, the city of Ceylon will enter a strict lockdown for the first 10 days of the annual armistice celebration, and no unauthorized entry or exit is allowed. This has been personally verified by Shuj, and all gates of Ceylon are currently under lockdown. As a civilian, he cannot be allowed to pass through. This state will continue until the holiday day, which is 8 days later. At that time, the heirs of the kingdom of Wattel and the kingdom of Delan will arrive at the city of Ceylon at the same time. The two sides will meet and have friendly conversations under the bell tower of Ceylon, and once again reaffirm their willingness to peace. Subsequently, the celebration will be officially announced. It is said that this cumbersome process is to imitate the real situation during the ceasefire that year. Why don't I remember writing something like this before? Shuj reluctantly withdrew his gaze from the busy and joyful residents and began to re-examine the people and things inside the tavern. Since the city of Salem has been sealed off now, I cannot easily leave, so I must come up with other ways. Shuj's gaze fell on the customers who came in and out, as well as the female bartender Sally who was circling between them, and his thoughts also turned accordingly. In the past 2 days, he has been collecting as much information and intelligence as possible from the city of Seren. However, so far, he still knows nothing about the upcoming changes in the city 8 days later. His fear of the future is like a deep black haze, weighing heavily on his heart, making it difficult for him to breathe. Shuj stared at the cup on the table, the tea in the cup swaying gently, and the light and shadow flickered in it, making him dizzy. In this state, the chaotic sounds in the tavern seem to have become somewhat distant. In order to solve the current dilemma, Shuj has returned to the strange world he saw after his death more than once. Although he has never seen the strange figure wearing a black suit again, the objects hanging with various prices and conditions still remain in place. After strolling through the entire office area, Hyoga found that the vast majority of conditions in that world were not something he could afford and pay for now. The only thing that could be considered cheap was a storage cabinet on his workstation. He had repeatedly confirmed that in front of the drawer on the second-to-last floor, the words, 20 silver coins, were written in the black mist. This is a seemingly cheap condition. For merchants or wealthy families with a certain background, this can only be considered a small sum of money, but for those who are busy every day and night to make a living, 20 silver coins are already a huge burden. In order to gather these 20 silver coins, Hyoga rummaged through the old house where he had settled. In the end, he only managed to gather 10 silver coins and a pile of scattered coins. This is also why he still needs to calm down and continue writing the manuscript left by his body in this situation. Tomorrow is the deadline for submission, with a total of 30 silver coins for the manuscript fee. Shuj silently calculated in his heart, but if I only use these silver coins to open those cabinets tomorrow, it means I will have to waste almost a whole day again. This is not a wise choice. Thinking this way, Shuj couldn't help but lift his head and his gaze drifted towards the agile figure spinning between the dining tables like a butterfly not far away. Hyoga sighed and said, I didn't expect to borrow money from someone just 3 days after I arrived in this world. 20 silver coins. After hearing Hyoji's words clearly, the young and beautiful waitress's gaze became cautious. Helpless, Shuj had to explain, don't worry, Miss Sally. I can pay you back this money tomorrow. It's urgent, and you should know that I don't have the habit of gambling or going to Waterflower Street. Sally wrinkled her nose and said, who cares about these? Shuj patiently looked at her, trying to make his expression and gaze appear as open as possible. Finally, the girl was defeated in the confrontation and sighed, okay, that's almost all of my savings. While complaining, she went to the grocery store next to the kitchen and quickly picked up a locked small wooden box. For the sake of being friends. Sally quickly stuffed the wooden box into Shug's hand, and the weight passed from her hand left Shug speechless for a moment. The girl carefully examined the expression on the young man's face before her, and then smiled contentedly, as if she had exchanged her large savings for something precious. Remember to return me tomorrow, Mr. Ernst. I know where you live. After saying these words, Sally abandoned Shuj and returned to her work. She only left for a while when someone in the tavern started making loud noises. Having obtained what he wanted, Shuj no longer intended to stay in this noisy brewery, so he wrapped his coat around the heavy wooden box and left the tavern with his unfinished manuscript. As for the promised, sneak-away version, for Schubert, he is planning to talk about it tonight. After spending about half an hour, he finally returned to his residence. It was a small building with 3 floors, said to have been purchased by the Ernst family in the city of Salem nearly 100 years ago. The specific reason is unknown, and the only thing Shuj knew was that it had indeed been abandoned here for a long time. As for the folk, there even appeared a completely new legend like the ghost in Ernst's old house. However, every time he returned to the old house, Shuj felt that the legend also had some truth. Whenever he walked between those old decorations and walls, he felt like the ghost in the legend. Although the old house was dilapidated, its size was not small. After returning here, Shiogu spent a lot of time closing and locking all the windows and doors. After that, he went to the bedroom located on the 2nd floor and then lay on the bed holding the heavy wooden box. Soon, a faint drowsiness struck, so Shuj obediently closed his eyes. At the moment he fell asleep, a void of dreams also descended upon him, and an invisible and strange force acted on his body in a strange way, stripping his spirit and leading it towards another world. Quickly, a cold sensation awakened Shug's consciousness. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the familiar desks and various devices appeared in front of him again. However, in this oppressive darkness, he still did not see anyone else. The heavy wooden box was right in front of him, so Shuj reached out and opened it. He took out the 20 silver coins that the hard-working girl had accumulated, and squatted down at the table holding them. The penultimate drawer of the locker. Hugh clearly remembered that he had always used it to store some useless things, such as useless bills, replaced work cards, unused mobile phones, and those moon cakes and Zongzi coupons that were too late to exchange. At the moment when he reached out his hand, Shuj inexplicably wanted to laugh. He pinned his hope for changing his fate and future on a drawer that he didn't even want to open, which made him feel somewhat ironic. As the distance between Shuj's palm and the line of text shortened, the silver coins lying in his palm began to vibrate and hum faintly. Finally, when his palm reached in front of the floating black text, the change occurred. I saw the silver coins trembling violently and turning into fine dust. Then, the strange words composed of black mist immediately changed. The original words disappeared and were replaced by black tentacles suspended in the air. They quickly swayed and rushed towards the silver coin powder floating in the air, like the tentacles of sea anemones busy filtering seawater in the ocean, swinging back and forth in that ball of powder. The predecessor of Shuj's body was a 2-year apprentice at the Witchcraft Academy in the Kingdom of Waterloo. Although during that time, he was just like other apprentices, busy with various physical and miscellaneous tasks every day, he also saw many strange scenes. The memories left in his mind provided Shuj with some confidence and made him not feel too lost when witnessing these strange changes with his own eyes. As a magician apprentice who wasted 2 years in the academy but was only qualified to learn 2 basic tricks, Shuj was looking forward to the changes in front of him. I hope these 20 silver coins can be exchanged for something useful. Otherwise, I will have to find another way. Shiogu carefully examined these constantly swinging black tentacles, as if observing his own pet. Under their activity, the silver-white powder made from silver coins exploded and disappeared quickly. Then, these, full and well-fed, black tentacles also gathered together again, forming a spherical thick mist. Subsequently, the thick fog gradually dissipated. Hugh tentatively reached out his hand towards the drawer. This time, he did not touch the invisible wall again, and his fingers successfully touched the handle of the drawer. He suddenly felt a bit familiar with this scene. When playing mobile games on my own, drawing cards seems to be similar. Thinking about it this way, he actually relaxed a bit. Unfortunately, I can't play the song now. Otherwise, at such an important moment, I would have to play some festive songs and then wash my face and hands. Hugh smiled and shook his head, then restrained his thoughts and reached out to grab the handle of the drawer, pulling it out forcefully. Then Hugh regretted it. At the moment the drawer was opened, he saw a huge black mist spewing out from it. At this moment, he was half kneeling on the ground, leaning forward. There was no time to dodge, so he was immediately submerged in the rich black gas. In the next moment, these black mist suddenly shrank, forming a solid and huge tentacle in Hugh's horrified gaze. On this tentacle, countless shadows kept shaking, like huge suction cups attached to the tentacles. In extreme shock, Hugh quickly withdrew and retreated. However, before he could take a second step, the tentacle suddenly stretched out, like the wrists and feet used by soft-bodied creatures to prey. It tightly wrapped Hugh's legs and waist in an extremely rapid posture, and the tremendous force made Hugh's legs unable to move. Before he could make the next reaction and action, the huge tentacle further tightened and then lifted Hugh into the air. What the hell is this? What kind of thing? Hugh opened his mouth and roared silently. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Tentacles and Inscriptions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Tentacles and Inscriptions. In a world resembling a dream, tightly bound by a huge tentacle released by one's own hands, such a plot was something that Hugh had never thought of. It just shouldn't happen to oneself. This huge tentacle, condensed from eerie thick fog, has an extremely cold and slippery touch that reminds Hugh of the wet rubber. As the light and shadow on those tentacles flow, he feels a chill piercing through his clothes and crawling towards his entire body. The tentacles continued to tighten, and soon, Hugh lost the last bit of space to maneuver. He felt like a worm tightly wrapped in spider silk. No matter how hard he tried, he could only barely wriggle his body. So, what's going to happen next? As a person with extensive knowledge and a mind filled with all kinds of messy information, Hugh immediately associated himself with various different endings. In his imagination, he had less than 10% chance of surviving, 30% chance of dying in an extremely bloody manner on the spot, and the remaining 60% could be classified as taboos. Just as he was nearing despair, this tentacle had a new movement. Its end slowly lifted in front of Hugh, and at this moment, Hugh realized that the end of this tentacle was wrapped in a layer of sturdy keratin, which looked like a sharp black knife. At this moment, Hugh stopped thinking. Because he noticed that the black sharp knife was aimed at his chest. Before Hugh could make his final struggle, the tentacles had already fiercely pierced down. In an instant, Hugh saw the black shadow penetrating his chest, and the icy sensation that had originally stayed on the surface of his skin also flowed through his entire body with the piercing of this black sharp knife. Immediately following the cold is a severe pain. This was something that Hugh, as a person who had already died once, had never experienced before. In extreme pain, his mouth opened wide, but he couldn't make any sound. He now felt countless hands tearing at his skin and flesh from different directions, and the constantly flowing cold sensation turned into vicious threads that were entwined around his bones and internal organs, as if he wanted to pull them out of his body together. The pain is still intensifying. The cold that coiled around his body was like a real water body, and Hugh gradually suffocated in extreme pain. Finally, Hugh felt that the darkness was connected in front of his eyes, and his thoughts and consciousness were like foam in the ocean, which collapsed and disappeared. A mournful and loud scream came from the empty Ernst's old house, so heart-wrenching that the crows hiding in the shadows of the house were frightened enough to rest. They flapped their wings in fear and flew into the air with noisy protests. However, after circling around Ernst's old house, they saw that there was no movement inside the house again, so they fell back down and stepped on the branches of an old tree next to the house to communicate and discuss in hoarse voices. The intense pain brought Hugh back to this sober world. Unconsciously, the skinny young man lying in bed was already tormented by pain and sweating profusely. His body involuntarily arched up, like a large shrimp jumping out of the water and dying from hypoxia. This deep-seated pain is far more profound than death itself. Hugh kept rolling on the bed, and as his mind became clearer, the pain that remained in his skin and flesh became clearer. The passage of time became extremely long at this moment, and every movement of his body, every rapid breath, and even every thought brought more terrifying torment to Hugh. I don't know how long it has been. When the crows who had been startled before returned to the old house to rest, the pain on Hugh's body finally disappeared almost completely. The remaining is the lingering stabbing pain in the brain. Hugh only felt as if there was an additional rotating gear in his head, with sturdy and sharp teeth constantly cutting through his brain, as if he wanted to permanently engrave something inside. The afternoon sunshine shone on this delicate small town, with a strand passing through the cracks in the old curtains of Ernst's house and falling on the surface of equally old furniture. As time passed, this light slowly rotated along with the hands in the magic clock and finally swept over the sweat-soaked body on the bed. Hugh took a heavy breath. As the pain in his brain subsided, he finally regained his consciousness. Everything that had just happened to him was like a real and terrifying nightmare, especially in the latter half. He could almost feel the changes happening in his head. It was probably not an illusion, but a strange change that he currently couldn't understand or explain. Hugh completely relaxed. Now, not only his clothes, but also the sheets and bedding were completely soaked in his sweat. Lying here was very uncomfortable, but he didn't want to move at all. After the panic and fear gradually moved away, what was left for Hugh was ecstasy. Magic inscription. He murmured this word, which was originally extremely distant from him, and a smile appeared on his pale and weak face uncontrollably. Just now, it wasn't until the tingling sensation became weak that Hugh truly realized what he had gained from that pain. In this vast world called Van N, wizards hold an extremely special position. As the only group in Van Gogh's long history that can truly reproduce miracles, wizards enjoy a privileged social status and treatment in all kingdoms. According to the standards provided by Merlin and the council located in the far north, anyone with a talent for casting magic and the ability to use it in their body can become an official mage as long as they are certified by the council. Therefore, the wizards of Van Gogh may not necessarily have noble or scholarly backgrounds. Before obtaining excavation and certification from Merlin and the Law Commission, they may be ordinary clerks, rude mercenaries, prostitutes living in crowded buildings, or miners who need to go deep into mines and farmers busy harvesting food. Once they obtain the identity of a magician, they will be eligible to enter the local academy for study and formal evaluation. In legend, the wisdom goddess Mel, who manages Van Gogh's magic, also controls all rivers, lakes, and oceans in Van Gogh. Scholars in the Legislative Council believe that the movement of magic is similar to that of water. They are small and impenetrable, hidden among all things in the world, attracted and gathered by the spellcasters, and returned to nature due to the use of various magic and the death of the spellcasters, forming a vast sea of magic. And when the magic in this vast ocean becomes too abundant, scattered magic will be used by the spellcasters, so the magic in the world always thrives. Based on this viewpoint, they assign corresponding titles to the spellcasters. Beginners who have just started learning are called raindrops, which means they can only accumulate a small amount of magic in their bodies, just like holding on to rainwater falling from the sky with their hands. Then comes the stream, referring to those who possess more magic within their bodies, have undergone the magic engraving ritual, and are able to record various common spells and use them. Only then can the spellcasters truly enter the magic palace. Going forward, we will become the backbone of the law committee. These wizards are known as valleys and lakes. The former is extensively dispatched by the Law Commission to various places in Van Gogh, participating in various affairs and teaching, while the latter is more like scholars. They often appear as important academic advisors to various kingdoms, and wizards with the title of lakes are also allowed by the Law Commission to create spells in their personal names. The highest title is Deep Sea. The meaning of this term is very simple, which refers to the magical power and knowledge possessed by a certain mage that is as unfathomable as a real ocean. These elites who are allowed to own a mage tower are extremely rare. To obtain this title, not only do they need to be strong enough in terms of strength, but they also need to make sufficient contributions to existing spell theories. From raindrops to deep sea, this is the level of mage in the eyes of ordinary people. However, in fact, for those more pragmatic lower-class people, there still exists a special identity under the raindrops. That is the mage apprentice. Unable to truly accumulate magic, can only rely on objects containing magic and techniques forcibly memorized to perform simple tricks, unable to engage in systematic learning, and not allowed to participate in the magic inscription ceremony. Most of the time, can only handle various miscellaneous tasks as servants. Hughes' predecessor, the true illegitimate son of the Ernst family, once worked as a magic apprentice in a magic academy for 2 full years to make a living. The talents possessed by this body are extremely limited. The spellcasters are always proud, so they believe that even servants and apprentices who serve them must be wise enough. Therefore, after discovering that the predecessor of Hughes couldn't even master the 2 simple tricks that apprentices were allowed to learn well, he decisively kicked him out of the academy. It was precisely after that the illegitimate son of the Ernst family, who pioneered his writing talent in popular literature. For the predecessor of Hughes, magic inscription is a term that cannot be further away. He can only learn from the words and phrases of others that this is an important ritual that can truly make magic learners become wizards. For Hughes, however, this is a seemingly unimportant set of writing that he casually wrote. The vast majority of theories and laws of magic are extremely complex for spellcasters. Therefore, in many cases, spellcasters are just containers of magic. To truly achieve this miracle of magic, they need to use the special ritual of magic engraving to engrave the requirements, steps, and corresponding principles of casting magic into their memory. And the amount of magic that each caster can accept is also limited, and each engraving in memory is a huge challenge for the caster. Therefore, for the vast majority of magicians, daily casting is often done through consumable magic books. Hughes recalled the words he had typed on the keyboard in his mind, and then he struggled to sit up, his eyes slightly closed, and began to carefully explore the wonderful changes that had occurred in his spiritual world. In the boundless chaos and darkness, Hughes gradually saw what he was looking forward to. That is an incredibly huge metal disc. Grand and exquisite, with a complex mechanical structure densely covered with numerous patterns and patterns. The disc is divided into 5 layers by its special metal structure from the inside out, and on the lines that make up each ring, there are evenly distributed 1 hexagonal groove after another. On the innermost ring, there are 3 hexagonal grooves, which double to 6 on the outer layer and increase to 12 on the outer layer. On the edge of the outermost ring, there are nearly 100 grooves. On this innermost small ring, one of the hexagonal grooves has already been filled with special colors. The copper-green fluorescence flickered within it, while the black veins outlined several winding and twisted soft tentacles. Upon closer examination, Hughes found that their images seemed to be identical to the tentacles that had caused him immense pain before. With the concentration of Hughes' spirit, the tentacle patterns in the grooves seemed to come to life, gently twisting at a specific frequency in the fluorescence, as if responding to Hughes' thoughts. At this moment, Hughes felt that he had gradually understood everything in front of him. As a worldview created based on games, it is reasonable to have some very gamified settings. So he opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and lifted his right hand with the instinct already engraved in his spiritual world. His mouth opened slightly, and a strange and obscure syllable blurted out along with his instinct. A strange change immediately struck him. Hugh could clearly feel a cold current sweeping through his head, like cold flowing water, flowing along his arm and finally converging on his palm. Waves of swelling and pain appeared, and Hugh felt as if something was about to gush out from his palm and fingers. He immediately changed the direction of his palm and aimed it at the bedroom door leading to the corridor. In the next moment, the swelling and pain in Hug's palm reached its peak. Accompanied by an indescribable strange sound, several thick and twisted tentacles sprayed out of his palm in a way that Hugh could not understand in the green fluorescence. The huge impact directly applied to the bedroom door. In just an instant, the heavy wooden door embedded with some iron craftsmanship broke away from the door frame and poured heavily into the corridor along with that force. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Long Road Ahead. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Long Road Ahead. Shuj, who successfully destroyed the door of his bedroom, did not have time to deal with the chaotic scene because the magic he successfully unleashed drained the scarce magic in his body in an instant and successfully shattered his spirit. In addition, when he was forcefully engraved with magic before, he consumed too much physical strength. Unexpectedly, Hugh collapsed directly on his bed and fell into a coma. It's funny to say that this was the deepest sleep he had ever had since he came to this world. There is no fear of the future, no unwillingness to live in the past, nor the messy words I have written before. There is only one dream. A dream that is both complex and simple. In his dream, Shuj saw an immensely huge ship sailing in an endless and vast ocean. The surging waves kept crashing, and various strange creatures kept jumping out of the water, casting curious glances at the ship. He dreamed that he was standing on the deck of a large ship with a compass, but the ship was a bit old and the waves were too rough. He couldn't see exactly where the compass was pointing, only feeling that the seemingly huge old ship was constantly struggling in the midst of the huge waves. Dreams are absurd. Because in the next moment, Shuj realized that his gaze had drifted up to the top of the big ship again. He found that his body seemed even bigger, and the ship was like a wooden model placed in a bathtub in front of him. Thinking of his terrible experience on the ship just now, he clung out his hand like a baby, gently pinching the ship and wanting to replace it with some new parts. Squeak. The wailing sound from the old floor awakened Shuj from his vague dream. He opened his eyes, only to find himself enveloped in darkness, and what shone in from outside the curtains was no longer the afternoon sunlight, but the faint glow created by the magical streetlights on the street outside. He turned his head with some difficulty, but saw the light of a lantern shining on the corridor leading to the bedroom. Hugh suddenly woke up, disregarding his physical weakness, and quickly got up. He grabbed an empty vase placed at the head of the bed and said, "Who's there?" "Hey, it's me, it's me." A familiar voice came over, and soon, accompanied by the creaking sound of the floor, the dim yellow light moved over. The figure holding the lantern also revealed its figure and face. "Hillhead is up. What exactly happened in your house? Are you okay?" Shuj recognized the owner of the sound, so he breathed a sigh of relief and suddenly lay back on the damp bed. This visitor is called Putrin Gulen, who belongs to the kingdom of Durland in terms of bloodline. It is said that his ancestors have witnessed the rise and fall of the city of Seren, as well as the negotiations between those two kingdoms, and even had a prominent position at one time. However, the current Gulen family has long withered, and Putrin, as the only heir of this destitute family, has become a young thief in the city of Seren. Before the owner of Shuj's body was expelled to the city of Seren, Putrin had been secretly residing in the old house of the Ernst family, and it was precisely because of this that the two equally destitute young people formed a wonderful and profound friendship. Even though Hugh only stayed in this body for 3 days, he could clearly feel the trust of the original owner of this body in Putrin, and his understanding of the state of Salem in the past 2 days mostly came from this special friend. "Thank you for Hilford's protection. I thought you were dead." All the doors and windows were locked, and this place is still a mess. Hugh shook his head weakly on the bed and said, "Your god of thieves will not protect me. Okay, then I'll thank the god of desire and the god of writing for your kindness. I didn't take away your genius, okay?" Hugh didn't have the strength to argue now. He struggled to move twice and finally slipped off the bed. At that moment, Putrin lit up the old magic lamp in the room. A green face appeared in a somewhat dim light, overall handsome, but a scar on the right face damaged the overall beauty. The left eye was still turning blue due to fighting with someone, and there was still an unshaven stubble on the lips. This is a very typical young man from the city of Salem. This is true both in terms of appearance and temperament. Putrin extinguished the lantern in his hand and then helped Hugh onto a chair next to the bed. He looked at the door frame that had lost its leaf, then at the bed soaked in sweat, and asked in confusion, "What exactly happened?" "I went to the tavern to drink at night," and Sally said, "You haven't appeared since you left the tavern at noon." As he spoke, he glanced at the closed curtains and windows again and said, "The door is also locked. I've seen no signs of anyone coming in from outside. How did you make it like this?" At the moment of hearing this question, Hugh's already somewhat delayed thinking immediately became clear-headed. He sat on the chair and gasped for breath, his gaze sweeping over the thick door panel that had collapsed in the hallway and had already become slightly deformed. Over the years, the experience of fabricating in his work allowed Hugh to quickly come up with a set of excuses. He then curled his lips and forced out a somewhat embarrassed smile, saying, "It's nothing, it's just that he had an argument with the people from the newspaper about the manuscript. I originally planned to take a nap after coming back, but the more I thought about it, the more angry I became. In the end, I had to vent my anger on it." After speaking, he shrugged and said, "You know, this house is very old, and I didn't expect this broken door to be so unbearable to be kicked. Newspaper. Or was it because I used your pen name before?" "No, but not by much, and they seem to want to continue suppressing my manuscript fees." Hugh casually spread rumors while trembling to the desk. He picked up the kettle and poured himself a glass of cold water, taking a big sip. At night, the city of Saren would become very cold, so this glass of water also had a hint of coldness. Feeling the chill passing through his throat and reaching his abdomen through his esophagus, Hugh's body finally regained consciousness. At this moment, Putrin, like all the young people who were prone to passion, began to vent his dissatisfaction and anger towards the air on behalf of Hugh. How can these things brought up by the giant-eared goblins live so comfortably? In my opinion, they deserve to be dragged to the crystal mine of the Legislative Council and buried. In a few decades or even centuries, they will be dug out by the miners and filled into the furnace. Don't they know how important your work really is? Even the river and swamp witches know they have to keep bound fishermen. Do these bastards really understand what they're doing? Putrin's ability to curse is outstanding, and his language is very versatile, filled with the unique beauty of the streets and alleys. However, Hugh was somewhat dissatisfied with him compared to the fishermen who were caught and used as tools by the river swamp witches. Just as he was about to speak up and persuade Putrin, a strong sense of hunger suddenly rose. As soon as he arrived at Hugh's mouth, his words immediately changed. He shook his head and said, "Stop talking about this, anyway, or submit the manuscript tomorrow morning. What time is it now? I've been sleeping for too long, ready to go eat something. After dinner time, but those pubs are all open." The anger on Putrin's face disappeared in an instant. He leaned over and patted Hugh's shoulder, saying, "Go to Sally's place for a drink. More precisely, I'll drink, you eat." Line. Hugh nodded, so he quickly changed into clean clothes, put away the documents on the table, and walked out with Putrin. The city of Salem at night is completely different. The streets are very lively, and many holiday decorations that have already been hung up have already shone brightly in the night. The merchants and craftsmen who sell decorations are very clever. They grind the crystal waste containing rare magic into fine powder, and then add it to the decorations made of metal movable glass. Therefore, as long as it is at night, these decorations can emit light under the influence of magic. Although they cannot last long, their low cost and price are enough to add some color to the lives of the lower-class residents. Due to the abundant production of sour beer in the city of Ceylon, most residents have the habit of going out for a couple of drinks at night. If it's normal, people can still see many miners coming from nearby mines to drink here. However, as the festival approaches, Ceylon is no longer allowed to enter and exit freely. Therefore, most of the people who appear on the streets are locals with 2 coins in their pockets, or tourists who come here specifically for the holiday. There are many people who know Putrin, so he always greets people like this and that when walking. Sometimes Hugh is really curious about how this guy gets along with the people in this small town. And it's still a fusion of 2 meanings. Hugh walked silently on the side as usual, neither before nor after he took over this body, so it naturally did not attract anyone's attention. A middle-aged man wearing the raindrop mage badge walked past Shuj and watched him enter a hidden tavern. Shuj then turned his gaze back and his mind began to spin. It is now almost certain that I have indeed completed the magical inscription. And my previous speculation about that dream world was not wrong. As long as I paid the corresponding price and chips, I could draw the corresponding power from it. Although the process of obtaining power may be full of pain, the benefits it brings are real. A slightly pungent odor drifted in the air, originating from a vehicle loaded with many heavy wooden crates. It was parked at the entrance of a shop, and several people were busy unloading goods. In today's Van Gogh, vehicles that use secondary crystalline minerals as fuel can be seen everywhere. Similar things are even more common in kingdoms filled with nobles, but unlike the vehicles used to transport goods, noble lords always have many new requirements for their vehicles. Generally speaking, with the formal closure of the city of Saran, freight vehicles were no longer able to enter the city normally. Therefore, this rough and bulky truck was either transporting goods within the city, or there were some routes that could pass through the blocked city gates. So Shuj couldn't help but take 2 more glances. Putrin really likes to smell the exhaust gases emitted by these vehicles. He doesn't care at all about the pungent smell left by the burning of secondary crystals, and even has some enjoyment. When he saw Shug stop, he reached out to pat his shoulder and said, "What are you looking at?" "Find inspiration." "Oh. Looking for inspiration." Putrin became interested and said, "So, are you planning to write something new next time? Can you reveal it? It's definitely not in that kind of car, right? I've never heard of such a creative idea before." Of course, Shuj knew what Putrin was saying. He shook his head and said, "It's not very realistic, as you know. If it were a vehicle like this, the interior would definitely be narrow and small, without any aesthetic appeal. Let's change the scene. I've seen a Mr. Walters car before, big and spacious, with all the metal edges wrapped in velvet, tsk. I don't want to get into trouble and get involved. Okay, for safety reasons, but I really think this idea is great. Maybe many people are willing to watch it." A gust of night breeze blew, and Shuj took a deep breath. The fresh air dispelled the chaotic thoughts in his mind, and also redirected his attention back to the dilemma he was about to face. For the first time, Shuj smelled the scent of magic in the air. As the spellcaster said, it was an extremely abstract and indescribable vague feeling. Shuj only felt that as he breathed and walked, the huge disk that had been silent in his spiritual world seemed to start spinning at an extremely slow rate. Originally, after Hugh had exhausted the magic inside his body, the hexagonal groove pattern located at the innermost part of the disk had become extremely dim. However, at this moment, Hugh noticed that with the injection of that weak magic, the pattern symbolizing eerie tentacle magic had once again revealed a copper-green fluorescence. According to common sense, after completing the magic engraving ceremony, I am already capable of becoming a stream-level spellcaster. However, my understanding of magic is too shallow, and the magic in my body cannot even support the release of that magic. Moreover, I lack an overall understanding of its specific killing power and effectiveness. Therefore, so far, the so-called magic for me is just a knife that cannot be precisely controlled. In thought, Shug and Putrin stopped in front of the tavern, looking at the customers coming and going in front of them. Shug let out a long sigh of relief. The road ahead is long. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Pungent knows you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Pungent knows Shug ultimately fulfilled his promise to show Schubert the manuscript in advance. People from all walks of life are prone to developing their own quirks. Taking Shioga himself as an example, he likes to confine himself in a small space, whether it's writing or thinking. In short, he hates having someone stand by his side to review his labor achievements while he is buried in his work. This habit had already been developed when he was still a student. Every time he took a Chinese exam, what he was most annoyed with was having a teacher standing behind him watching him write. Once this happened, he would immediately have his fingers stiff, his brain blank, restless, and eager to pick out those eyes that were peeping at him on the spot as a bubble. At the same time, he also dislikes having others examine his work in front of him. Especially when he is aware of some uncertain content in his work. So when Shug watched the sleazy-looking tavern owner Schubert and the excited Putrin reading his manuscript with their beer glasses and red eyes, he inevitably began to get annoyed. If it weren't for worrying about them doing some inexplicable strange things with their manuscripts on the spur of the moment, Shug would have chosen to leave long ago. For a while, these two guys finally parted ways, still unsatisfied. Under the light of the tavern, the two big men with red faces and ears crowded together easily evoke bad associations. Really great. Schubert's tongue was already a bit tangled, and he trembled as he handed the stack of paper back to Shug. But to be honest, the stimulating part seemed to have decreased a bit, but that's not something important either. Just the imaginable parts are enough. Enough. Putrin was working as a repeater next to him, and as a young man, his face was now 2 points redder than that of old Schubert, as if he was about to bleed. You seem to be writing better than before. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, maybe like some reviewer said, the style has changed, but the text is more enticing. Shiogu smiled, accepting their praise and compliments. Their evaluation made him feel much better. It seemed that he would not show any flaws in his writing and works, and the quality of his original writing was not insurmountable. The number of guests in the tavern is slightly lower. At this time, most of the customers who come here are serious drinkers. These tired and elderly customers do not touch beautiful girls like those young people do. Therefore, Sally, who has been busy all day, finally got a chance to rest and sat next to the three of them. She placed a plate in front of Shug. The dish is simple, but well prepared, with 2 slightly toasted breads, 1 pan-fried beef with sauce, and some vegetables boiled in clean water stacked next to it. A very common combination. The cooking methods of beef and bread come from the kingdom of Waterloo, while the fragrant vegetables come from the kingdom of Deland. The cultural traces of the two have long been integrated in the city of Salem, and when paired together, they can be said to complement each other. Shug nodded politely at the tired girl and said, "Thank you." "Aha." Sally playfully curled her lips, then took a cup and poured herself some beer. "It's really just a little bit, it should only be enough for 2 bites, but even so," Schubert still cast a dissatisfied look. "That's too much. You can't drink so much." Sigh. Before she could finish speaking, Sally had already lifted the glass. After drinking these slightly sour iced beers, she happily put down the glass. "You said it's too late, Uncle. Our family makes a living by brewing beer. As the eldest daughter of the family, how could I not drink? You're still too young. So you still want me to be a maid?" A very classic process of arguing, Shug and Putrin didn't want to pay attention to their arguments, so one person lowered their head to eat and the other drank heavily. The atmosphere at this moment was enough to make anyone feel comfortable, but the delicious and juicy beef tasted bland in Hugh's mouth due to his mind full of things. He is doing his best to recall and piece together everything about the world of Van Gogh. This is destined to be an incredibly difficult process. The main storyline of Black Sun Era takes place 200 years later. If I were to face the world 200 years later, perhaps I would soon find the true breakthrough point. However, what I know now is only a vague framework, with too many details that cannot be speculated on. Now, I can only infer from known information and logic. He picked up a piece of vegetable, which was a green plant rhizome with a taste similar to broccoli, but the orderly arrangement of triangular patterns on it indicated that it was actually a plant that was different from ordinary cognition, growing in a world filled with magical elements. Hugh gently rolled the vegetables in the sauce before feeding them into his mouth. The outline and setting he once wrote quickly scrolled through his mind. In the original timeline, the disaster in the city of Salem was seen as the true origin of the Black Sun Era, where the downfall of Salem laid the groundwork for the 40-year war that swept across Van Gogh. Ultimately, that terrible war was ignited by the irreconcilable conflict between the two kingdoms of Walter and Delan. This 40-year war led to the collapse of divine beliefs in this world and confirmed the famous prophecy. Hugh swallowed the vegetables in his mouth and, by a stroke of luck, asked, "Putrin, do you still remember how that prophecy was said?" "Prophecy? What are you saying?" "It's a prophecy about the Black Sun." Putrin looked over with a strange expression. Although he had drunk a lot, his mind was still clear and he didn't quite understand why Shug suddenly asked this question. He certainly knows what this prophecy is, and in fact, this ancient story is passed down in all the kingdoms and civilizations within Van Gogh. The origin of the prophecy of the Black Sun is long unknown, and its spread is extremely widespread. From the rugged Rove Plateau to the flat and river-filled Goddess Plain east of the Kingdom of Delan, and to the eastern countries across the ocean where treasures are found in the mouths of merchants, there are various variants of this prophecy. However, among the countless circulating versions, the core of this prophecy itself has not undergone significant changes or differences. One day, the gods will fall into madness, the nights will be devoured by evil beasts, and the shattered throne will be filled with laughter. The eternal Black Sun will become the messenger of war, believers who have lost miracles and divine grace will fight against each other, and nobles who have lost their offspring and crowns will flow with blood. With a hint of drunkenness, Putrin finally recounted that strange and ominous prophecy. He stared at the ice cubes swaying in the drink and recited the last two sentences of this prophecy. People no longer look up at the sky because there is only a black sun left. People often look up at the sky because there is also a black sun there. Shug quietly listened to Putrin's retelling of this prophecy. To be honest, he felt that Putrin had a great talent as a bard, especially after drinking. His tone of voice was rhythmic and full of emotions. At this moment, he would appear a bit sentimental, completely different from the passionate young man who would fight with the people at a word of discord in the daytime. How can you talk about such strange things? I always thought only the members of the god-nagging Black Sun Society would talk about these things all day. Sally frowned as she was somewhat dissatisfied with what her two friends were discussing. It's okay if we hear it, but don't let the members of the legal committee hear you. Be careful they take you for questioning. Shug nodded obediently and then stuffed a piece of beef into his mouth. Of course, he couldn't tell Sally and Putrin that everything in this prophecy would soon come true, and the damn initiator sat in front of them. For the Black Sun Society mentioned by Sally, Shug is quite familiar with it. However, the Black Sun Society he knew of was also active in that century later Van Gogh, and in the setting, it was a group of people who worshipped and pursued the eternal black celestial body. In the mouth of the Legislative Council, the Black Sun Society is often referred to as the Black Sun Faction, but eccentric members of the society are often unwilling to identify themselves with terms such as sect and followers. They are active throughout Van Gogh, committed to expanding the influence of the association, and promoting a set of magical theories and social philosophies based on the eternal black celestial body to various parts of Van Gogh. Therefore, the Black Sun Society became a direct opponent and enemy of the Law Commission. In the main storyline of the game, Black Sun Era, players need to make a choice between the legal committee and the association, which will determine the affiliation of both sides of the players' camp. At this time, the scale of the Black Sun Society should be very limited, and the members of the society are mostly blindly believing in that prophecy. Hugh picked up the last piece of bread on the plate and thought seriously, so, what connection will the Black Sun Society have with the upcoming events in the city of Salem? Damn it! I should have written in more detail at that time. Perhaps tonight, I should go back to my dreams again, hoping to find more things that can be exchanged at a low price there. With this unstable and eerie magic alone, I cannot cope with too many unexpected events, and besides using force, I also need more intelligence and information. The plate was empty, so Shudge raised his head. Old Schubert went to chat with a few fox friends, and Shudge judged from their slightly twisted expressions of excitement and occasional glances that these old thugs were most likely discussing the manuscript he had just written. On this table, Sally was arguing with Putrin about something, and from their reactions, it seemed that Putrin had put forward his somewhat dangerous ideas again. If I had to say that even if this prophecy were to come true one day, I'm afraid that such a world wouldn't be any worse than it is now. Putrin patted the table, his face turning even redder as he said, "Think about it. The city of Salem is the center of attention for all of Van Gogh, and the Waters and Delans live together here. In fact, we should have lived together for a long time, but what about this? The conflict between the two kingdoms has never decreased for so long, but every time there is conflict and bloodshed, we, the people of Salem who have long been integrated, will create new barriers. Disgusting. I feel like every celebration at this time of year is both hypocritical and disgusting. Walter is so dominant that he never stops pressuring the Delans in the city. Unfortunately, at this time, those damn successors and aristocratic elders still sit together with hypocrisy, telling us that everything is normal, and then wait until the new year to repeat the past. Enough, Putrin. Shug raised his hand and pressed Putrin's shoulder, saying, "I understand your resentment, but don't forget, Sally and I are from the Walters. In terms of bloodline, I am even a member of the Ernst family." Putrin finally quieted down, sighed weakly, and then put down his glass, which still had some beer. At the moment when the glass collided with the table, a violent tremor accompanied by a dull loud noise came from afar. Putrin's cup in his hand shook violently, rubbing against the edge of the table and falling off. Shug instinctively reached out his hand, and in response to Sally's exclamation, he firmly grasped the handle of the beer glass, avoiding its fate of being shattered to pieces. However, the remaining liquid spilled on Shug's clothes, which made him, who had not yet drunk, feel a lot of alcohol. "Thank you." Sally smiled and took the beer glass, her eyes squinting into two beautiful lines in her smile. "It seems like you're not as weak as you appear, at least your movements are very agile." "Just lucky." Although Shudge was also surprised by his momentary reaction that he had just shown, he nodded humbly. Then he stood up and patted Putrin, whose face turned red. "It's getting late, and we should go too," he said. "I don't know what happened in the city just now, be careful." "Thank you, Miss Sally. You can completely remove the word Miss. Amidst Sally's dissatisfaction, Shug and Putrin walked out of the brewery one after another. Putrin immediately reached out and put his hand up, saying with a smile, "Did you hear me? They had hoped you could change your name a long time ago. Listen to me, be bold. Maybe we can get a discount when we come here to drink in the future." However, Shudge ignored him. Because in the air, he smelled a somewhat peculiar odor, which was not the odor emitted by vehicles burning secondary crystals. It smelled even stronger and more pungent. It's like something exploded like something. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Night Returners. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 6 Night Returners. Although Putrin still likes to run to Ernst's old house when he has nothing to do, in fact he still has his own place to live, so after walking 2 intersections together, Shug separated from his friend. The pungent smell in the air is still evident, and many people who have finished drinking and walked at night cover their noses. Some of them even started vomiting under the stimulation of this smell. The sound that came before was in this direction, on my inevitable way home. Intuition and logic tell Shug that any recent anomaly that occurs in the city of Saren may reveal the development of future events. He increased his vigilance and began to move rapidly along the shadows of the buildings along the road. However, before walking far, he saw roadblocks and swaying figures. Several huge magic crystal lamps were placed on both sides of the road, with bright lights covering the road. Beside them, the police officers in the city of Saren were busy, and next to them stood 2 mages dressed in council-style robes. From their figures, they should be a man and a woman. Walking in the darkness, Shug suddenly felt a piercing cold, as if someone had cast their gaze on him. The feeling was extremely obvious and could not be ignored. After glancing at the 2 mages standing in the middle of the road, Shug consciously stumbled out of the shadows. He tugged at his beer-soaked clothes and then loudly asked the police officers, "Hey! Gentlemen, what's going on here?" The mages remained silent, while the police officers were not very friendly. One of them immediately spoke up and rebuked, "It's none of your business, hurry up." "But this is my way home, sir. I live in Ernst's old house." "Oh, it's you." The police officers immediately realized that although they didn't know Shug, they all knew that the unlucky illegitimate son living in Ernst's old house was always adding color to their leisure life, so their originally strict attitude suddenly eased. "Mr. Ernst, please take a detour, there have been some accidents here." The police officer raised the lighting tool in his hand, which was a metal tool carved into a long cylindrical shape. It was filled with some crystal minerals containing magic, and combined with some symbols and patterns engraved on the metal long cylinder, it could use magic to emit light. If possible, Shug would prefer to call it a flashlight. The police officer pointed to a small path next to him and said, "Let's take Mrs. Small's road, it's not much away." Shug nodded and loudly thanked him, then followed by his somewhat chaotic steps, disappearing from the sight of the police and mages like those who had truly drunk. He should have accelerated his pace like a normal person, but the icy coldness on his back did not disappear, so Shug cautiously maintained his slightly unsteady pace. So, a young night traveler who had drunk too much walked alone on this secluded path. The public water intake pool on the roadside saved his life. Under the cold gaze, the young figure rushed to the pool. He struggled to pick up the cold water with his hands, took 2 sips, and then reluctantly washed his face. This made him look even more embarrassed, and of course, the chill in the water finally woke him up, so he continued to walk forward. The inexplicable tension disappeared. Shug continued to move forward, but there was already a lot of cold sweat on his back, and the huge gear that had been slowly rotating in his spiritual world finally came to a stop. He can basically be certain that he was just really targeted. There will inevitably be an induction between magic and magic, and it is obvious that the magical inscriptions one has experienced are not perfect. The leaked traces can easily attract the attention of other professional mages. Fortunately, those 2 members of the legal committee ultimately did not stop themselves from questioning. In Van Gogh, all spellcasters who are able to control magic but are not registered with the council will be directly labeled as wild mages by the council. The council's behavior style has always been extremely domineering, either joining or becoming targets of rewards and control, without exception. I have no way to explain my magic source to the members of the legal committee right now. TSK, the trouble is really getting more and more. Shug couldn't help but turn his head to look at the buildings on his left side while thinking. This path, named after the famous businessman Mrs. Small, is actually a gathering place for grocery stores. On both sides of the road are small and large shops, which usually sell daily necessities and groceries. Therefore, they rest and close early. The people who operate these shops are also mostly wealthy, so they do not live in their own shops. That pungent smell is already very strong. Hugh judged that he was actually very, very close to the place where the loud noise was coming from, and it was even very likely that the location was behind these shops, and he was probably only a few dozen steps away from him. He stood still by the roadside for a while, perking up his ears in an attempt to listen, but he couldn't hear any sound at all. Strange. Even though the streets were sealed off, no one was handling the incident at the location. Hugh squinted his eyes, and just as he was about to further investigate, a series of violent noises suddenly came from the store separated by a wall. It sounded like something was rapidly moving, crawling, and hitting the empty cabinets in the darkness. Hugh quickly took 2 steps back. The light on the street was very dim, and several magic crystal lamps embedded in the walls were already very old. The dim yellow light scattered down, making the night appear even more turbid and deep. The surroundings were quiet, and at this moment, Hugh could only hear the sound of his heart racing. The sound across the wall ceased, but the sudden silence made it even more frightening. Hugh gently moved his leg, and his boots rubbed against the gravel on the street. However, with this movement, a violent noise came from the grocery store. This time, I heard it very clearly. The sound source is moving in its own direction. Subsequently, the street returned to silence once again. This feeling is extremely eerie. Hugh only feels that the wall in front of him seems to have become a mirror, and behind the mirror, there is a shadow that imitates his own actions. As long as he makes an action, it will immediately respond. What exactly is this? Hugh quickly pondered as the magic gear hidden in his spiritual world began to rotate again. His right hand lifted slightly and aimed in the direction of the sound. The only magic engraved in his body was already ready to be unleashed. What are you doing here? A sudden sound broke the terrible deadlock, and at the moment the sound sounded, Hugh heard a series of commotions coming from the store. The things hidden in the darkness were like beasts feeling threatened, and in an instant, they moved away from the wall and retreated back into the darkness. Hugh turned his head and saw a figure holding a magic lantern. In the dim light, the soft and elegant robe of the Legislative Council leaned down, highlighting the body's lines exceptionally clearly. Madam. I heard a sound inside here, maybe there's a thief. Hug's skin color was already pale, and the water droplets left by washing his face were still hanging on his face. His right hand, which was originally intended to release magic, pointed to the shop that made a sound. Now, he looks like an excellent citizen actively reporting abnormal situations. The figure walked over and gradually raised the magic lantern, revealing a delicate but unusually cold face. At this moment, Hugh once again felt the chill like a needle prick, as if countless pairs of eyes were peering at him. It's you. An indifferent gaze swept over Hugh's pale face, perhaps because the young man in front of him appeared somewhat embarrassed at this moment, or perhaps because Hugh's clothes emitted a smell of alcohol. The female mage did not continue to move forward, but instead stood a few steps away. She hung a magic lantern around her waist and then grabbed a spell book with complex patterns on the cover. The exquisite badge carved from crystal or hung down from the book, and Hugh quickly glanced at it, only to see that the badge seemed to depict a lake with layers of ripples. Obviously, standing in front of Hugh is a young and outstanding, lake-level, caster. From all aspects, it is excellent. I've heard those people talk about you before, Mr. Ernst, right? Between her words, the female mage's indifferent gaze was accompanied by a hint of scrutiny. She carefully scrutinized Hugh up and down, from his hair, to his clothes, and to the documents he carried with him, without missing any details. Then she turned to the nearby store and said, "All right, there's nothing more to do with you here. Please go back and rest, Mr. Ernst. Perhaps my colleague will come to visit you tomorrow to inquire about some things." Don't be nervous, it's just a normal procedure. Okay. Okay, I understand. So please be more careful, madam. Hyogo lowered his head slightly and said, the sound inside is very strange, it doesn't sound like a dog kept by the shop owner in the store. The female mage didn't seem to pay much attention to Hyogo's kind reminder. She gently shook her head, gesturing for Hyogo to leave quickly. Then she walked to the wall and slightly lifted the spell book in her hand. Although Hugh really wanted to see the appearance of the lake-level mage, who could be regarded as a backbone of the legal committee, when casting spells, his rationality still made him choose to retreat at this moment. So he quickly turned around and left the slightly narrow Mrs. Small shopping street with some disorganized steps. The icy feeling that was imposed on his back lasted for a long time, until Hugh had already seen the familiar old house, and this strange feeling slowly disappeared. Just like during the day, after entering the old house, Hugh locked all the courtyards, doors, and windows, and no one else could enter except Putrin, who also had the key. The bedroom door was still lying on the hallway, and Hugh used a lot of effort to drag it to the miscellaneous room. In a short period of time, he could only use curtains to replace the door. During the process of changing clothes and bed sheets, everything he saw and heard on his way home kept coming to mind in Hugh's mind. He didn't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but the target had already been fixed there, and it wouldn't change at all due to his personal will. Something must have happened in the city that could make those lazy police officers act late at night, and even 2 lake-level or above spellcasters appeared, which is enough to illustrate the seriousness of the situation. After taking care of everything, Hyogo dragged his tired body onto the bed. The small wooden box used to hold the 20 silver coins was placed aside, and it had become empty. This tangible change constantly reminded Hyogo that he was in a wonderful world that could affect matter with intangible power. Perhaps I should explore the world of dreams more often, as I still have no knowledge of its secrets. Perhaps I can also find some cheaper exchange terms there. Nowadays, any new discoveries and improvements are important to me. With such thoughts in mind, Hugh quickly cleared his mind and turned off the magic light in the bedroom, plunging himself once again into the embrace of darkness. The office, covered in traces of the past, once again appeared in front of Hyogo. He sat on his own workstation and glanced at the drawer he had opened with 20 silver coins. After taking a deep breath, he stood up and patrolled along the familiar and unfamiliar corridor. As he approached, the black text blocking various equipment, furniture, and containers kept appearing and disappearing, and one harsh and bizarre condition after another was displayed in front of Hugh. As he scrutinized these conditions, he began to categorize them in his own mind. It seems that the conditions here can be roughly divided into 3 categories. The first type is a relatively basic material type, which includes specific requirements for currency or collectibles, such as a specific quantity of gold coins, complete sets of jewelry, or a certain quantity of certain gemstones. The value fluctuations among these are very exaggerated, ranging from dozens of gold coins to hundreds of top-level crystal minerals, but in fact, this is already the best type of goal to achieve. The second type leans more towards achievement and identity. Although the conditions here are mostly proposed based on specific things, they are similar to proof of a certain title or symbols that can represent a specific social status, such as the certification badge of a mage's level and the collection directly issued by the royal state to the nobles to prove their identity. And the third type. Hugh stopped in front of a water dispenser, his expression becoming somewhat strange because the black mist blocking the dispenser created a somewhat peculiar condition. The body fluids of the decaying dragon. Put this thing in the water dispenser. Are you serious? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Discoveries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Discoveries. After wandering around in this dream, Hyogo can already determine that the third category, the vast majority of which are some bizarre components from various creatures. Blood, limbs, teeth, or eyeballs and ears, and so on. There is nothing unexpected that they cannot bring up. Some of these conditions are even more disgusting than their inherent danger, and while they are nauseating, they even carry a hint of black humor. It looks like it's deliberately disgusting. Hugh was very skeptical that there was really someone in this world who could tolerate the stench emanating from swamp witches and endure nausea, collecting a whole basket of fresh hair from their bodies. Because to his knowledge, the swamp witch, a disgusting and sleazy monster, only has a few areas of hair on her body. To achieve such conditions, it may not only require strong strength, but also sufficient resilience and psychological resilience. Nausea. Hugh made a silent retching gesture to show his disdain for this unpleasant condition, and then he continued along the corridor. In fact, these three types of conditions can all be referred to by specific substances, and there are no restrictions on the methods of obtaining them. If I want to obtain a lake-level mage's identity badge, I can either pass the assessment of the legal committee step by step and become a lake-level mage, or use other methods to obtain it from other mages. However, just like the magic I obtained by paying 20 silver coins for the first time, until I truly pay the price, I will not know what I have obtained. I can only assess the risk, but cannot estimate the corresponding benefits and value of this risk. Hugh sighed and cursed inwardly. In the past, we used to do draw cards at least and also did guaranteed and pseudo.random. It's better here, we take the risk ourselves. His gaze swept over a row of workstations next to him, and as expected, there were a bunch of goals that could not be easily achieved. Gradually, Hugh had reached the edge of his familiar office area. In fact, the company that Hugh used to work for had contracted an entire building as an office area. Project teams like him usually only occupied a part of the area on one floor, while other workstations on the same floor were scattered with other gaming projects belonging to the same studio or center. Due to busy work and laziness, Hugh rarely ran to other people's territory, which led to him working for many years, but in reality, he never had to leave other places outside his own studio. As he moved away from the familiar work area, the black mist and shadows began to become heavy and dense. In some corners that Hugh had never seen before, even complete darkness appeared. No matter how hard Hugh tried, he could not see the things inside. These darkness formed a oppressive and terrifying wall in the darkness, and Hugh could not know what exactly existed in this darkness, nor dared he touch it casually. If this is indeed based on my cognition and memory, then the world outside the window should not be pitch black. Once again, Hugh stopped in front of the darkness blocking the way. He was curious about this unknown territory, but he didn't dare to take risks easily. He looked around and finally found a mug on a desk that was not marked with a price and could be picked up at will. He picked up the cup and stopped a few steps away from the darkness. Then he bent down and placed the mug on the ground, pushing it forward with force. After a burst of friction, the mug disappeared into the darkness. Hugh saw very clearly, as if the cup had been swallowed by a huge mouth. At the moment when it completely sank into the darkness, all the sounds disappeared completely. He couldn't even determine whether it was the darkness that isolated the sound, or whether the mug had fallen into an abyss without a bottom, or it blends into that darkness. Hugh had no intention of gambling with his own body, so he decisively moved away from the darkness and instead came to the elevator lobby near his office area. To his surprise, there was no oppressive color that could isolate the road here. On the contrary, in front of the elevators that could lead to other floors and allow him to leave the building, there were also words representing conditions floating. Hugh curiously leaned forward, but this time, the obscure words composed of strange lines did not translate in his mind, but turned into an extremely fierce impact that acted on his thinking in the form of pain. The intense pain caused Hugh's body to tremble, and he couldn't help but hug his head, and his body naturally crouched down. He couldn't understand the words floating in front of the elevator door. The dull pain in his brain began to slowly dissipate, and Hugh suddenly realized that what he had just seen was likely a more terrifying and elusive existence than those in darkness. So he didn't care to continue resting and decisively left the elevator hall, never daring to glance at those words again. Shuj, who had recovered from the pain, quickly regained his consciousness. What had just happened allowed him to carefully examine this strange world that was in line with his past, but clearly different. Shyoga walked back to his workstation and sat wearily on the familiar chair. Now, only this inconspicuous corner near the window can bring him a little sense of security. Sure enough, the so-called golden fingers that are easy to use and considerate are just my imagination. Shyoga looked at the elevator hall that was faintly visible in the dim light, and at the constantly appearing exchange conditions around him due to his own vision. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Now it's certain that this place is not safe for me at all. Whether it's tonight's experience or the process of obtaining magic after paying 20 silver coins before, it's full of pain and risk. He took out a piece of white paper from the side, took out another pen, and began to carefully outline it. Soon, a somewhat rough plan structure diagram was revealed under Shuj's pen. At present, my activities in this world are confined to this area by a black mist, mainly based on my previous studio. To both sides, it includes several commonly used meeting rooms, game versions, and testers' locations, as well as a part of the two neighboring studio groups. In terms of overall area, the space here is not very large, but all the channels, elevators, corridors, and stairs that can leave here have been completely blocked. Based on the current situation, I cannot find a way out of here no matter what. Shyoga roughened out the areas that connected to the fog on the structural diagram, and also placed a big question mark on the elevator room that had just caused him serious mental damage. He knew that his exploration of this dream world had probably come to an end. This time, he still couldn't find the strange figure he had just seen when he died here, as if the other person was just trying to show his face in front of him and push himself through the door leading to Van Gogh. It's not without gains. Shyoga carefully recalled the conditions he had just seen, and soon he recorded on this piece of paper the ones he felt were not so harsh. 50 universal gold coins. If we use some special methods, we may be able to gather them all. A set of authentic female aristocratic jewelry from the Kingdom of Waterloo. Similarly, if I am willing to use a special method, I should also be able to obtain it. Then there are some materials that are relatively inexpensive and can be purchased in ordinary stores. Without requiring the quality of the materials, they should be able to make up a lot, but whether they can be used as exchange conditions still needs to be verified. After a moment, Shuj arrived once again in the corner with two eerie doors, one of which remained tightly closed and suspended above the black sun crown, which seemed extremely outrageous at first glance. And the other door, depicting a giant wheel being dismantled, pieced together, and reassembled, was easily pushed open by Shuj. Just like before, he took a deep breath and then jumped into the abyss behind this door. There are still 7 days left until the occurrence of the Salem incident. In the pursuit and coercion of the countdown, Shuj quickly woke up, like a real office worker. He solved his personal cleaning problem at an extremely fast speed, and walked out of his home with a manuscript, following the hoarse chime of the magic clock. At just after 8 o'clock in the morning, many shops had already opened, and the staff were actively preparing for the opening. Some boys and girls with green faces had already taken the latest newspapers from the newspaper office and started shouting and selling them on the street. "Mr. Writer, would you like a newspaper?" A girl with a small braid recognized Shug, so she bounced over and smiled as she lifted a newspaper emitting a strong ink smell. She was so proactive that she almost stuffed the newspaper into Shug's mouth. The original owner of this body originally didn't pay much attention to current events and news, and the act of buying newspapers only began after Shuj came here. The little girl has a strong business acumen. She believes that if Shuj buys it the first time, she will definitely buy it the second time, so every time she sees him passing by, she will definitely shout him out. Shyogu smiled and took the newspaper, then casually popped out a coin. The girl happily reached out to catch it, then threw her stable customer behind her and hurriedly turned to the other side, starting to search for her new target. The Peace newspaper is the only newspaper in the city of Salem. It is not only a newspaper, but also undertakes the responsibilities and work of a magazine and publishing house. Just like its name, the newspapers, magazines, and even some messy textual products founded by the Peace Daily carry a very strong, serene style, which cannot be separated from the word peace. It seems that as long as this name is called, the city of Serene can always avoid the flames of war. This type of photo, taken directly by the wizards and journalists of the Legislative Council using special equipment and magic, can preserve the dynamics of the shooting. In the photo, Hugh saw a long string of railway tracks, as well as a steel giant with fangs and claws, swallowing steam, and magical patterns carved all over its body, embedded with various unique weapons and high-grade magic crystals. The title above the photo is very eye-catching. The latest breakthrough in the Kingdom of Waterloo. The comprehensive combination of magic and steam. At the bottom of the photo, there are 2 lines of inconspicuous small characters written. According to the former Minister of War of the Kingdom of Waterloo, it has been revealed in public that in the past 2 years, the Kingdom of Waterloo's military funds have been heavily tilted towards a new field. Some insiders have also revealed that this decision has won the attention and support of the Legislative Council. Hugh continued flipping through the newspaper as he walked. Perhaps because he knew the future trend of the world, he read a strong sense of war between the lines in this newspaper, whether it was the appearance of the magic war train that occupied the front page, or the local conflicts and contradictions that were easily seen as talk and humor, or the gossip about certain crystal mine riots that were squeezed into the corners of the newspaper in Hug's eyes. These words and images are like flowing water, all converging into a huge pool called unstable. Perhaps in no time, this special pool will be able to breed terrifying monsters beyond people's expectations. Hugh's reading speed was very fast, so soon he flipped over to the 2 pages dedicated to reporting on local news in the city of Seren. The city of Salem is not large, so there is very little news that can be reported. In the past, it was always occupied by various gossip news and strange low-quality advertisements, with only occasional 2 announcements from the top. As expected by Hugh, there was no mention of the loud noise or vibration that occurred last night on these 2 pages. So Hugh put down the newspaper in his hand, squinted in the sunlight, and his gaze drifted towards the street on his right side. He was walking on the road that was blocked last night, and now there are people coming and going here. Everything is as usual, even there is no noticeable smell in the air. Hugh's gaze scanned the buildings on both sides, hoping to determine where the accident had occurred based on their appearance. However, the ability and level of the police officers and spellcasters to handle affairs completely exceeded Hugh's expectations. Just as he was about to choose to give up, the magical disc located in his spiritual world suddenly trembled slightly, and the thin magic that had settled inside him became more active as if stimulated. With that vague intuition, Hugh lowered his head and looked at the exceptionally new street bricks under his feet. So underground. He suddenly realized something. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. A Poor Worm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. A Poor Worm. He is not a legendary rat man. After burying these clues and traces in his heart, Hugh stopped at the roadside station and joined the waiting queue. The Peace newspaper is located at the other end of the city of Salem. Although Salem is not big, he doesn't want to waste too much time walking. If it weren't for verifying what happened last night, he could have chosen to take the public magic van as soon as he left the house. This type of public transportation is common in the Rovi Plateau and the Goddess Plain countries, but their quantity is relatively limited in each city. The use of magical crystal mines by the Legislative Council has already reached its peak. However, a large vehicle that can transport dozens of people simultaneously and is driven by magic often has extremely high costs. And now, with the prevalence of steam and machinery, more and more substitutes are beginning to appear on the Rovi Plateau, and Hugh's hometown, the Kingdom of Waterloo, is at the forefront of this technology. Perhaps it won't be long before this old-fashioned magical transportation will be squeezed out of the historical stage by their cheaper and better competitors of the same kind. After all, in the eyes of the vast majority of people, producing a machine that can directly convert magic into power by burning crystalline minerals is far more cost-effective than spending a lot of money and human resources to find advisors and experts from the Law Commission to depict magical patterns. After all, if you choose the latter, it is equivalent to being permanently linked to those dangerous and stingy mages. Soon, Hugh boarded the vehicle heading to the west side of the city of Salem. The car is very crowded, people stick to people, the strange smell is suffocating, and the perfume sprayed in the van makes the smell in this small space difficult to describe. It's 100 times more terrifying than rushing to the subway in the morning. Hugh shrank into the corner of the carriage with his breath on. He didn't want to stand closer to the window, purely because he was thin and weak, unable to squeeze the tall and sturdy passengers next to him. His feet are almost off the ground. In this situation, not to mention reading newspapers, even normal breathing became a problem, so Hugh gave up struggling. He tried his best to clamp the paper bag containing the documents, and then obediently shifted his attention to his spiritual world. Just like other spellcasters in Van Gogh, who had completed his first magical inscription, he was now able to accumulate magic in his body normally. However, the magic in the natural environment is often thin and unstable. After a whole night of rest, the magic that was originally consumed by the unknown tentacle magic was only 80% restored. It's not possible to continue like this. Who can only use their trump cards once? And from the previous situation, once I use this magic, it's very likely that I will faint on the spot. Hugh imagined in his mind what he would look like in the face of unexpected situations and enemies, but felt a bit amused. The saying, "never make up your mind to sleep," is probably a reflection of your current situation. After all, the appearance of lying in place and waiting to die after the magic is exhausted is really no different from sleeping soundly. If I am unable to obtain what I truly need in the dream world, then next I must find a way to connect with other spellcasters. Either it is the Dharma Council, or those civil organizations marked by the Council as wild mage groups. In short, in terms of the use of spells and the growth of magic, I must receive systematic learning theories and methods. Hugh pondered like this, but couldn't help but think of the young female mage from the legal committee who had already entered the lake level and called him last night. He remembered that the female mage had said that there would be members of the legal committee visiting today. This is another new variable. For the legal committee, the favorable impression of Hugh is really limited. The sensory difference between creating something and facing it directly can be quite significant. At least Hugh can be certain that when he typed, "The Law Commission upholds the principle of neutrality," in the document, his smile on the face must be very twisted and ferocious. Past life experiences have taught him that neutrality is often a false facade that cannot withstand any test. The car gradually came to a stop, and the doors were roughly opened. People immediately pushed and shoved each other as they spewed out of the open doors, merging into the streets of Salem. Hugh got off the car with the crowd, took a strong breath of fresh air, and then turned towards the direction of the Peace Daily based on his body's memory. Today's newspaper office appears particularly busy, and this appearance even seems somewhat out of place with the entire city of Ceylon, because Hugh discovered that as one of the important places in Ceylon, there is not much festive atmosphere inside the newspaper office. Only a metal decoration and a poster are casually hung on the side wall. Besides, there are no more traces of celebrating the ceasefire celebration. "Good morning, Mr. Ernst." A young female clerk with heavy makeup twisted her waist and walked over. She was dressed in the most popular printed long dress of the Delan Kingdom, holding a thick stack of documents in her hand. She blinked at Hugh and then showed a bright smile. Hugh was separated from her by a table, so the female clerk leaned forward slightly and placed the stack of manuscripts on the table with both hands. Then, she propped herself up and leaned her face in front of Hugh. Hugh politely squeezed a smiling face. He resisted the impulse to sneeze and stepped back half a step without saying anything. After avoiding the overly strong smell of perfume, he nodded and responded, "Good morning, Miss Cherry." I came to find Philip, the editor-in-chief. Today is the day of submission. Oh, of course I know. The female clerk, also known as Miss Cheeley, leaned forward again and said, I just came out of Mr. Philip's office. He's talking to an important guest, so could you please rest on the table outside for a while I go get you a glass of water? Thank you. Hugh didn't want to have too much trouble with the lady in front of him. He really didn't like this rich perfume, so after saying thanks, he walked to an empty table near the office. In just 2 short steps, there were no fewer than 5 clerks greeting Shyoga. These are all old clerks of the Peace Daily. They have been working here since Hugh Ernst first arrived in the city of Salem, so they can be said to have a deep understanding of Hugh's submissions. Among the clerks who just greeted him, there are even a few who are his loyal supporters. These social animals and perverts hidden in newspapers are always able to see what they want to see at the first time. This is already their rare hope and benefit every month. In the editor-in-chief's office, there were faint voices of arguments. It sounded like the pot-bellied editor Philip was not getting along well with his guests. Considering that in any era or world, journalists were the most agile and quick to obtain information, Hugh immediately perked up his ears and focused his attention, trying to capture the main theme of the office debate. It's really too noisy inside the newspaper office. No matter how hard Shudge tried, he could only hear some scattered words and couldn't combine these vague sounds. He couldn't help but furrow his brows, and with a slight movement, he leaned against the wall in a somewhat tired posture. Then, he regained his energy and continued to eavesdrop on the sound inside. A wonderful change happened at this moment. Just as Shudge was devoting all his energy to eavesdropping, he suddenly felt his silent magic disc slowly spinning, and the sound around him suddenly became weak and distant. In contrast, the conversation in the nearby office appeared exceptionally clear. Shudge's eyebrows suddenly raised, and he almost immediately noticed the change in magic within his body. With the slow rotation of the magic disc, the limited amount of magic in his body was being consumed at a stable rate. This seems to be some kind of magical effect. Just like the sudden reaction speed I showed when I caught a glass last night. Shyoga quickly estimated the amount of magic he possessed, and then began to listen carefully to the ongoing arguments in the office. He started with the deep and rich voice of editor-in-chief Philip. Mr. Morel, you overestimated the influence of our peace newspaper in the city. You should be well aware that not many residents in the city really care about those matters. I have a copy of today's newspaper here, and you can take a look at the last 2 pages of news about the city of Saran. Here, no one wants to fight with others who live together. Subsequently, a voice responded to him. Oh. Is that so? Mr. Editor-in-Chief, you should know that our people have already been operating in Salem before. And the conclusions we have drawn from the public do not quite match what you have said during this period. Compared to Philip's rich voice, this, Mr. Morel, has a relatively smooth voice, which, in Shudge's own words, exudes a greasy feeling unique to those who have been in the upper class for years. Although his tone is not strong, his words also carry a hint of mockery and ridicule. If you feel that you and this newspaper have limited abilities, then you should tell us earlier instead of waiting until today to start regretting. Do as we say. Don't forget which ship you are sitting on now. Faced with Mr. Morel's aggressive aura, Philip, as the editor-in-chief, clearly felt a bit powerless, so he muttered to himself, there are only 7 days left. Enough, Mr. Editor-in-Chief, just do as we say. Sigurd listened attentively, but suddenly, a strong smell of perfume wrapped in a cup came to him, and then Sigurd saw the figure in a floral skirt sitting down opposite him. As Shudge's attention dispersed, the continuously rotating magic disc also came to a standstill, and naturally, the conversation sound coming from the office became as blurry as it was at the beginning. Damn it! Shyoga couldn't stop cursing in his heart, but on the surface, he smiled very politely and said, Miss Cheeley, aren't you very busy? Mr. Ernst, have you forgotten? As Philip's editor-in-chief's secretary, it's my job to entertain an important contributor like you for him. As she spoke, she pushed the glass of water over, and her bright red lips outlined a slightly uncomfortable curve for Shudge. I was still reading your previous article yesterday, haha, it was really written. She lowered her voice and her tone became eerie. Great. Thank you very much for the compliment. Hugh reached out his hand and was about to cover up his embarrassment with a tactical drink of water when he realized that there was already a lipstick mark on the edge of the water cup. He decisively stopped his movements and quietly changed the topic. I just heard a quarrel in the office. Don't you need to go and take a look? Perhaps Editor Philip needs your help. The guests he entertained had a bad temper and didn't allow anyone else to be present during the conversation. I was just kicked out. The brightly dressed female clerk laughed again and said, to be honest, chatting with someone like Mr. Ernst is more enjoyable. Just as Hugh was gradually losing control of the ferocious expression on his face, the door to the office finally opened. Subsequently, the voluminous editor-in-chief Philip stepped forward first. As before, he had two beards and a plump figure that stretched his clothes tightly, making him look extremely comical. After leaving the office, Editor Philip respectfully made a "please" gesture, and then a tall and thin middle-aged man wearing a black dress and unilateral glasses appeared in Shug's sight. This should be Mr. Morel. As if sensing Shug's gaze, Mr. Morel suddenly turned his head and looked over. Shug instinctively restrained his breathing and expression. His face was already pale, and now he looked like a restless or indulgent aristocratic youth, leaning against chairs and walls, looking weak and powerless. Hugh clearly felt the other person's gaze wandering. He felt that in just an instant, Mr. Morel seemed to have read through his features and facial expressions. After that, he didn't say anything but walked towards the entrance of the newspaper with the company of Editor Philip. Who is that young man? He seems to have the blood of the Ernst family. After walking out of the newspaper's door, Mr. Morel turned to ask Philip who was following him. So the obese editor-in-chief smiled and replied, he's just an illegitimate child abandoned by the Ernst family. Now he can only make ends meet through some vulgar language, oh, a pitiful creature. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Uninvited guests. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Uninvited guests. Hugh doesn't care how others talk about him. To be honest, besides the unpleasant title of Ernst's illegitimate child, he has already carried many strange titles. Most of these titles appeared after his submission began to be published, and one by one was outrageous, one was better than the other was unpleasant. From the initial Midnight Dawn, to the upgraded version of Five-Finger Lover, and then to the latest Happy Master, there are already countless such bad nicknames. The saying goes, more mosquitoes don't itch. When there are more strange nicknames, Shug naturally becomes desensitized. In Mr. Morel's gaze, Shug felt no respect or kindness, and his eyes hidden behind the lenses were filled with vigilance, contempt, and hostility. Hugh knew that this guy wouldn't have any good reviews of him, but it wasn't important, and he didn't care either. Now he is just a little curious about the identity of Mr. Morel. To his knowledge, the surname Morel is not very common, at least in the city of Salem. Its frequency of occurrence is extremely limited. Morel. Is this supposed to be a surname in the aristocratic circles of the Kingdom of Tehran? A close relative of the royal family in the upper-class circle. What would they do to find an equally non-mainstream editor-in-chief in such a completely non-mainstream newspaper? What big deal could they talk about? A series of questions flashed through Shug's mind, and he politely dealt with the chattering female clerk sitting across from him, while his mind was filled with contemplation. Judging from the two conversations he heard earlier, Mr. Morel seems to want the Peace Daily to release some special news in the near future. It sounds like these news are related to the Walters and Delans living in the city of Salem. During the conversation, Editor-in-Chief Philip seemed to mention that the other party wanted to provoke a fight. Was it a fight between the Walters and the Delans? Hugh frowned involuntarily as he thought this way. When he approached these issues, his perspective was different from that of ordinary residents of the city of Salem. Based on his identity as a half-water aristocrat and his own cognitive habits that transcended the world, Hugh quickly realized the possibility of extending these words. He knew that the contradiction between one ethnic group and another could not be easily resolved. Sometimes, time is not the true cure for resolving disputes and conflicts. If in a relatively peaceful environment, the people in the city of Ceylon can indeed gradually merge into a whole. However, in the past 300 years, the two huge shadows behind Ceylon have been exerting their terrifying influence here at all times. In the eyes of those tourists who come to admire the city, the two major urban areas divided by the central axis are indeed a spectacle, but it also indicates the hidden danger in the city of Salem. The barrier between the Wat-Els and the Delans has never been completely eliminated, and any government order from both countries will trigger new tremors here. Young people like Putrin are not uncommon. The closer you are to the bottom, the more vulnerable you are to the aftershocks caused by the fierce battles of the beasts. During his contemplation, the heavy figure of Editor-in-Chief Philip reappeared in Hugh's field of vision. A nauseating smile squeezed out of his slightly greasy face, and Hugh stood up and nodded in gratitude to the female clerk sitting opposite him. Then, he left the opposite side and the glass of water with a red lip print in place. The two of them walked into the office one after another. Editor Philip's office, as always, feels uncomfortable. Although it looks neat, the placement of many items and decorations is actually very awkward, especially the bookshelf facing the office door. A bunch of brand new and untouched books are placed on the bookshelf, as if deliberately displaying their collection. On that huge table, there are several different styles of ornaments and small sculptures, some of which are iron ornaments from the Kingdom of Waterloo, while the other part has a distinct Deland style. They are filled with colorful and smooth edges, which are easy to identify. Sorry. Well, the newspaper office has been very busy these days, you know, it's almost the holiday season. Of course I know, Mr. Philip. Hugh smiled and placed the paper bag containing the manuscript on the table, saying, "This time of year is indeed very important for the newspaper." Philip nodded haphazardly, picked up his own water glass, took a strong sip into his huge mouth, and then reached out to take Hugh's paper bag. Although his fingers were thick and short, they were exceptionally agile. He took out the manuscript in a few clicks and flipped through it at an extremely fast speed. Hugh closely observed Philip's actions and everything around him, but before he could finish reading it, the editor-in-chief Philip had already put down these manuscripts. Then he opened a drawer next to him, pulled out a document from a pile of paper documents and letters, and quickly picked up a pen to write on it. At the same time, he spoke up and said, Okay, I've probably read it. It's as exciting as ever, Mr. Ernst. I'll take the manuscript for now. As usual, hand over the documents to Ms. Chile, and she will pay you the remuneration. This bastard didn't even read the manuscript. Hugh laughed and cursed in his heart. This is also a very abnormal phenomenon. He is well aware that although the editor-in-chief Philip has extremely limited literary skills, he is always extremely strict with those contributors. Even if there is nothing wrong, he must pick some thorns from the manuscript. If he can use this to suppress the manuscript fee, he will be extremely excited. It seems that this guy has indeed encountered some tricky problems. To the point where he doesn't have the heart to worry about anything else. Quickly, editor-in-chief Philip finished writing the documents in his hand. As Hugh was about to reach out to retrieve them, he found that Philip's fingers were still pressing against the documents. Hugh looked up and saw Philip looking at him with bright eyes. "What's wrong, editor-in-chief Philip? Is there a problem with my manuscript?" No, you misunderstood, Mr. Ernst." Philip laughed again and looked at the coat on Hugh's body, which had already been slightly worn out. He spoke up and said, "Mr. Ernst, do you mind earning some extra royalties?" "Ah. Of course." Hugh hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. So Philip said, "It's like this, I hope you can write a few articles for the newspaper under the name of the informant of the Ernst family. We will provide you with the themes, and what you need to do is simply use your words to slightly package these themes." Around 10:30 in the morning, Hugh once again boarded the crowded Magic Box car with his fresh manuscript fee. This time, the compensation he received was much richer than before. In addition to the regular 30 silver coins, there were also 5 universal gold coins produced in the kingdom of Delan in the pocket of Hugh's close-fitting. 5 universal gold coins may not sound like much, but they are enough for Hugh to renovate Ernst's old house and then hire a competent butler and 2 servants for himself. If it were in the past, these unexpected gains were destined to be spent by cultivators in more fields, but in the current situation, they are destined to be consumed by cultivators in that unknown dream world and in their attempts to escape the city of Saren. The gains gained in the morning did not make Hugh happy. On the contrary, the various anomalies exhibited by the Peace Daily and the editor-in-chief Philip made Hugh more certain of the seriousness of the situation that followed. Some people or certain forces have secretly transported something into the city. It is highly likely that the explosion last night was caused by this, and the legal committee may already be aware of it. However, they may not easily express their stance on this matter, and there may even be involvement with the forces involved. The upper-class nobles in the kingdom of Delan seem to want to stir up some public opinion frenzy in the city of Salem in the near future, and they hope to use this to ignite the long-standing conflict between the Delans and the Walters in the city. At this moment, there was an argument inside the carriage. It sounds like a Walther bumping into something belonging to a Delan resident in a crowded carriage. Similar situations are very common, occurring several times a day. The Walters have a resilient and martial personality, so they consider the Delan people who love colorful things and art as cowards, while the latter often describe the former as barbaric. Examples like Hugh can undoubtedly be considered as outliers in the kingdom of Waterloo. Not long after, the car stopped, and the argument inside the carriage did not stop until Hugh left the carriage and walked onto the street. Hugh walked quickly towards his residence, just like before. He opened the door, walked into the foyer in a slightly dim light, filled a pot of water, and then walked towards the bedroom upstairs. However, just as he reached the middle of the stairs, the sunlight shining through the window revealed something unusual in the foyer. At the same time, Hugh discovered that the magic within his body seemed to have been affected by something, operating at an astonishing speed, along with the metal disc engraved with magic in his spiritual world, which also began to rotate. Someone has come in. This idea leaped out of Hug's mind. Taking advantage of the sunlight that poured into the room, Hugh saw something unusual in the foyer. A series of indescribable eerie marks on the old, white wooden floor. It extended all the way in the direction of the door, turned twice in the foyer, climbed up along the side wall, and finally disappeared by the railing of the second-floor corridor. This is clearly not caused by humans. Instead, it looks like the traces left by snails or other creatures after crawling. Hugh instinctively held his breath. Although he was not yet familiar with magic, this intuition from the spiritual world could not be ignored by him. So he slowly bent down, placed the kettle on the stairs, and then picked up a heavy wooden stick placed on the side of the stairs, which had been removed from the broken railing. He slowly moved upwards, his vacant left hand twitching slightly, ready to unleash the magic. Hugh walked silently and arrived at the corridor he was extremely familiar with. He saw that the eerie trace continued to extend here. It followed the corridor all the way, passing through 2 abandoned guest rooms, then passing by the small room used for storing miscellaneous items, and finally disappeared at the door of Hug's bedroom. Sleeping trough. Hugh cursed inwardly, then he lowered his body and reached out to gently touch the marks on the ground. A wet and slippery sensation came from his fingertips, and Hugh felt as if he had touched some kind of cold mucus. However, when he lifted his hand and rubbed his fingers slightly, the disgusting and sticky sensation disappeared again, as if all he had touched were traces left by water. Perhaps I should withdraw. It would be more reliable to report such matters to the legal committee or police station. Hugh quickly made a judgment, and then he decisively retreated downstairs. In order to make no noise, his speed is very slow. However, things didn't go as planned. A gust of wind blew from the direction of the bedroom, and then Hugh smelled a pungent and unpleasant odor. He recognized the smell, which was exactly the same as the smell he smelled by the blocked street last night. In the next moment, Hugh heard a sound. A series of rapid and loud crawling sounds, as if countless feet were tapping on the walls and ground. Now Hugh couldn't care to compare whether the sound was consistent with the strange sound he heard last night. He immediately gave up the idea of silently retreating, turned around and ran 2 steps towards the downstairs, then grabbed the railing next to him and jumped down, landing heavily on the floor of the hallway. At the same time, the noisy object chased after the staircase on the 2nd floor. Under the sunlight, Hugh saw an indescribable mass. That was an amorphous semi-transparent viscous substance that had already blocked the staircase on the 2nd floor. It stood there, with countless indistinguishable debris floating and twisting in its form, while its shape slowly changed in Hugh's sight. However, after several breaths, it had already acquired a rough humanoid shape, but within the twisted contours of the humanoid, it was still filled with colorless viscous substances and many miscellaneous objects from unknown sources. Combined with the way it moved, it is likely that these things were unintentionally swallowed into its body as it moved forward. The air in the hallway was almost frozen, and Hugh held the broken wooden stick he had used as a self-defense weapon. Memories kept surging in his mind, and finally, in an inconspicuous corner of his mind, he came up with a terrifying name. Is this a phantom worm? End of this chapter. Chapter 10. From Inside Out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. From Inside Out. In Van Gogh's extremely complex and chaotic magical ecosystem, the phantom worm is an extremely unique existence. Their fragile bodies, harsh living conditions, and need for magic led them to disappear from the ranks of Van Gogh. Generally speaking, these creatures can only survive in the cold lakes north of the kingdom of Tran. Phantom worms are very pure magical creatures. Their bodies are composed of magical mucus and clear water, and their characteristics are even infinitely close to those of pure elemental creatures. However, compared to those elemental creatures with consciousness and the ability to pose a real threat, phantom worms lack self-protection methods. Their exaggerated growth cycle and soft and fragile bodies often result in sudden death at some point. In their decades-long juvenile period, even a baby may inadvertently kill them easily. However, once the phantom worm successfully navigates its infancy, it will reveal its other side. That's what Hugh is seeing now. Enlarged in size, enough to engulf and envelop an adult. The magic in the body composed of mucus is even more abundant, enough to support their rapid movement on the ground. Their movements are secretive and their speed is astonishing. The cracks in the buildings and the underground pipes will become their paradise, and garbage, corpses, or any other waste will become their nourishment. But if that's all, the phantom worm will still not be a member of the law committee's prohibited list. Its most dangerous aspect as a magical creature is its ability to learn. From appearance, to language, and then to habits. As long as there is enough time and conditions permit, the phantom worm can demonstrate its true talent. Imitate the target, devour it, and completely replace it. Once we reach this point, only those spellcasters can discern. Hugh looked at the eerie slime that was constantly transforming into a human form, and his heart began to beat faster. He took a deep breath and then slowly withdrew a step. As if imitating his movements, as Hugh's body moved slightly, the soft and prone figure standing at the staircase also slowly moved, but it was not retreating, but struggling to move forward. It looks like a paralyzed person with a physical disability trying to walk down the stairs. With such a soft and prone body alone, it was impossible to move freely. Therefore, the soft body, which had already transformed into a human form, only took a step and rolled down the stairs as if it had fallen. The water bottle that Shuj had originally placed on the stairs was immediately wrapped in the body of the phantom worm, which was made of mucus. It collided with other debris carried within the body, and the water in the pot splashed out, but in an instant, it merged with the body. At the moment when the phantom worm fell, Shuj had already taken action. He did not take the risk of releasing magic, but rushed towards the direction of the gate with rapid steps. The phantom worm clearly realized that its target was running away, so it gave up imitating human form as soon as it rolled down the stairs. It returned to an amorphous viscous mass, with protrusions made of mucus extending from its body, forming many twisted limbs, some resembling human hands and feet, some more like the claws of beasts, and even two appendages that insects only possess. These limbs with different shapes swayed, and the chilling sound immediately sounded in the hallway. Fragmented and dense, it feels like countless hands are tapping and striking the ground. This is exactly the same sound that Hugh heard late last night in the Mrs. Small Store Street. This is an extremely amazing discovery. Explosions, pungent smells, noises in the shopping streets, phantom insects, legal committees among the many fragmented clues, there seemed to be some kind of connection, but at this moment, Shuj couldn't calm down to think, because the speed of the phantom worm was too terrifying. In just an instant, the terrifying sound of footsteps had already caught up with Shuj's back. At the same time, an unpleasant smell of corruption came from behind, elevating Shuj's sense of crisis to the extreme. Time seems to lag at this moment. Faced with the first crisis of life and death after arriving in this unfamiliar world, the metal disc in Shug's spiritual world spun at an unprecedented speed. Under the influence of magic, Shug's senses and reactions became sharp and swift at this moment. He suddenly stopped his steps, tilted his body to the side, and in an extremely awkward posture, barely avoided the sticky liquid that was rushing towards him. Immediately after, the broken guardrail that he had been holding in his hand smashed fiercely in front of him. Puff! It was like hitting a soft bag filled with water, and the bad touch was accompanied by a dull sound. However, Shuj did not stop his hand movements because of this. Faced with the sticky liquid ball that had been knocked to the ground by himself, Shuj decisively lifted his hand again, and the heavy wooden stick fell down again, hitting heavily on a limb extended by the phantom worm. Such a violent counterattack clearly exceeded the expectations of the phantom worm, as it danced its twisted limbs in a disorderly manner. However, the wooden stick in Shuj's hand fell down one after another, splashing mucus and water in all directions. Many debris also fell out of the phantom worm's body during the impact. Shuj's heart skipped a beat. He felt as if he couldn't feel tired, roaring and fiercely waving his rough weapon. As he watched, another twisted, sticky limb was about to burst under his blow, and the sticky lump that had already curled up suddenly surged up. This time, Shuj clearly felt that his strength had been absorbed. And when he wanted to pull back the stick, he found that the soft, translucent body of the phantom had climbed onto his weapon and wrapped it layer by layer. The disgusting mucus surged up, and countless extended limbs condensed back into one, as if swallowing food. These viscous semi-transparent substances rolled upwards along the wooden stick, almost enveloping Shuj's right hand holding the stick. Helpless, Shuj had to release his weapon and then saw a cheap landscape painting hanging on the wall next to him. He gritted his teeth and took off the frame, shaking his hands. With the sound of the wind blowing, the heavy frame immediately hit the body of the phantom worm, smashing the mucus that had already extended towards Shuj back alive. A series of intense movements had already made Shuj gasp for breath. Whether in his previous life or in this life, he seems to have no connection with a strong and healthy body. The manic heartbeat, rapid panting, and trembling limbs have all issued warnings to Chaoswitch, and his body can no longer bear too direct force to fight against him. Shug tried to take a step towards the direction of the gate, but the speed of the phantom worm was faster. Its soft, amorphous body quickly extended, pulling itself into a long strip and completely blocking Shug's path. It seems there's nothing we can do. Hugh gritted his teeth, lifted his left hand, and the copper-green light and shadow that filled the grooves of the magic disc began to tremble violently, and the tentacle patterns engraved in the grooves also became active. The swelling and pain that had once appeared filled Shug's left hand, while at the same time, the already extremely hungry phantom insect suddenly stirred up its soft body, and a large lump of mucus suddenly bounced up, tightly wrapping Shug's extended left hand. The intense itching and stinging instantly affected Shug's left hand. Under the action of that mucus, Shug could no longer feel the swelling and pain caused by the magic filling in his left hand. He gritted his teeth and completely relaxed his control over the magic. In the next moment, a terrifying impact erupted from the fluid-like body of the phantom worm. Shug saw the dark-colored tentacles bursting out of his left palm, accompanied by a series of muffled noises. The disgusting mucus that was hovering in front of Shug's body was easily torn apart by the thick and powerful black tentacles, and the mucus that adhered to Shug's left palm and wrist was easily swept away by these tentacles. The vitality of adult hallucinogenic insects is strong and resilient. Although they suffered a devastating blow in the first place, there are still many fragments of mucus that have retained some vitality falling to the ground. They twist their bodies one after another, trying to penetrate the nearest gap between the wall and the ground. Surprisingly, you still want to escape. Shug, who had successfully defeated the enemy, had already turned red in his eyes. The magical tentacles summoned by him immediately became active, swinging rapidly, just as Shug had seen in his dream world. A strong layer of keratin grew on their ends, turning their originally flexible tentacles into sharp knives. These sharp and powerful tentacles swung on their own, like eagles searching for prey, constantly piercing the ground and piercing through the scattered fragments of the phantom insect in their breathing. Pop it! As the last fragment of the phantom insect attempting to escape was crushed by Shug's raised foot, the magic in his body had completely run out. The black tentacles, which were still incredibly fierce in the previous second, immediately withered. In just a blink of an eye, they fell from Shug's palm, twitching and bouncing slightly on the ground before immediately becoming shriveled. Shug leaned against the wall and sat down, panting heavily as he watched the black tentacles he summoned with his magic quickly melt into the air. Shug's current state is much better than the last time he cast magic. However, the highly volatile emotions, intense movements, and extensive consumption of magic and spirit still made Shug lose his ability to move in a short period of time. He looked at the chaotic hallway and couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. The smell of the phantom bug after being killed is somewhat unpleasant. That was a smell that resembled the smell of food spoiling and rotting, but now this scent made Shug feel more relaxed. He looked around at the scattered fruits of war, and gradually a smile appeared on his face. After a moment of rest, Shug finally regained his composure. He glanced at the clock on the wall and then struggled to stand up from the mess on the ground. According to the female mage yesterday, the members of the legal committee will come to visit today. Before that, he needs to quickly cover up the traces in his home. As for the scattered remnants of the phantom worm on the ground, in Shug's opinion, this could be considered an unexpected joy. He remembers that he had seen the conditions related to it before while wandering in the dream world. Move, move. He muttered, then wearily walked towards the depths of the foyer. Shug's cleaning continued until the afternoon, and he spent a lot of energy finally thoroughly cleaning up the bad marks left by the phantom worm. At least on the surface. As for the cleaning on the magical level, Shug can only do his best. There are some sun-dried gray grass leaves in the old house, which are widely distributed and used. Whether in the upper class or the lower class, people like to burn gray grass to expel the odor in the air. According to a popular saying, the smoke from burning gray grass can also disturb the magic in the air, so it can dispel many annoying magical creatures and erase their traces. In addition, many artists are extremely obsessed with this type of grass, believing that smelling the smoke from the burning ash grass can enhance inspiration and strengthen the connection with the god of art or writing. As an inexperienced writer who exchanges writing for writing fees, it's normal for me to keep some fan dust grass at home, isn't it? Hugh muttered to himself while carrying the lit grey grass and walking through every corner of the house. Soon, the unpleasant odor brought by the phantom worm was completely dispelled, and the old house also became smoky. Hugh had to open the window to dispel the excessive smoke. For the debris mixed with the phantom insects in his body, Hugh took a very cautious approach. He gathered all these things in a box and took them to the abandoned garden behind the old house. Along with the 3 collected bottles of phantom insect debris, they were buried in bushes. Everything is ready. After Hugh changed into clean clothes, someone knocked on the door of the old house. Hugh tidied up his appearance and hair, calmed down his emotions and mentality, and slowly walked to the door, slowly opening it. A low voice immediately squeezed in through the half-open crack of the door. The Legislative Council, in accordance with Investigation Order No. 6, is visiting you. Despite being super cautious and super otaku, it is still inevitable that the sun will rise now. I feel like I'm having a party in my mind, highlighting a pain. We will try our best to keep updating the new book issue, and we also hope that everyone can vote more to spread and support it. Thank you very much, ORZ, end of this chapter.